And we're live, Chair.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to the September 22nd, 2021 Planning Commission special meeting. It is now 6:02 p.m. The Planning Commission meeting is now in session. My name is Dan Hubble and I'm the Planning Commission Chair. Tonight's virtual Planning Commission meeting is being brought to you using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being broadcast live and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel after its completion. Interim CPD Director Jeff Thomas and other staff members will also be participating in tonight's meeting remotely. Public audience members are listening and may be listening to the meeting by telephone or using Zoom. So welcome to all of you and thank you for joining this evening. For those of our guests, if you haven't heard the dossier, we're going to go through our roll call and order of business for our approval of the minutes, and then we will get to our first item that will include you. So with that, we'll move to the roll call. Commissioners, if you could please have your microphones turned on so that our Senior Administrator, Andrea, can conduct the roll, and we'll do a roll call vote. Andrea.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Boatsman has not arrived yet. Commissioner Friedman.
Here.
Commissioner Goodman.
Here.
Commissioner Chair Hubble.
Present.
Commissioner Murphy.
Here.
Commissioner Rashish.
Here.
Vice Chair Weinberg.
Here, and notice that Carolyn is just able to join us in the last few seconds.
And Commissioner Boatsman.
Present.
She must have used
Ted's link.
a link forwarded
Yeah.
from Ted.
I don't know what happened there. I went to open it. I thought, I can't find a link. Thanks,
In the
Ted.
future, reach out to me because the links are individual.
Okay, instead of Allison. Okay, right. Thank you.
Yep, reach out to me. Well, Allison can forward it to me. She just might not have seen it. Just because
Okay.
that would, now we have two Chair Weinberg, so let me change you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Vice Chair, if you want.
We're seeing double. All right. Well, thank you for the roll call. As I mentioned before, for this meeting, we're going to be continuing to utilize the Zoom platform. As always, I will do my best to recognize you in the order in which hands are raised. And of course, you can ask questions at that point in time. You can use your virtual hand or just speak up and get my attention if for some reason I miss the virtual hand. With that, we now move to the appearances portion of our agenda, where individuals wishing to speak live during our meeting may do so by telephone or via Zoom. This is the opportunity for anyone to speak to the Planning Commission on any item. All remarks will be addressed to the commission as a whole and not to individual commission members or staff members. If any person makes personal, impertinent, or slanderous remarks or becomes boisterous, threatening, or personally abusive while addressing the commission, I may request that that person leave the meeting. I can't imagine that's happened any time in my tenure, but nonetheless, it is a part of the script. When it is your turn to address the commission, be sure to speak audibly, state your name for the record, and your comments will be limited to 3 minutes. I do understand that there's at least one person that has signed up this evening, and I see Mr. Goldbach on the screen. Andrea, is Matt our only speaker?
Matt is our only speaker this evening.
Great. Well, welcome, Matt. Feel free to turn, I don't know if you're dialed in or not, but the floor is yours for 3 minutes. There you are. You're still on mute, Matt.
I think I'm unmuted.
There you are. We got you. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you. It's been quite a while.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm Matt Goldbach, for those who might not know me, and I'm going to be brief, which is also very rare. I just have one question.
Sorry, Matt, if you could just, I know you stated your name, but you can also state your address for the record, please.
Well, it's 9980 Southeast 40th Street, Mercer Island, Washington.
Thank you.
And during the last planning commission meeting, one of the planning commissioners asked for a parcel by parcel analysis of the net gain loss by town center parcel of the FAR proposal you'll be discussing tonight. I didn't see any of that analysis in the packet. And I guess I'm curious, I'd like to know when the public might be allowed to see that analysis. That's
Okay. That is a great question. And I do know that there were some materials that are going to be presented during the meeting today. So quickly, I don't know if either Deputy Director Andrea or Jeff have any comment on this, or if we want to take this offline.
Chair, for the record, Jeff Thomas, Interim Director of CPD. We're going to be covering some of that during the presentation tonight, and there's also some additional materials that were sent out to the commission this afternoon that we'll be covering here tonight as well. So I think during the scheduled agenda item, that'll be the right time and place to have that discussion.
Did that make sense, Matt?
Well, so it's not in the packet, but it will be discussed this evening. Is that correct?
We are going to cover that question this evening, yes.
Okay. I'll stand by.
Great. And just so you know, Matt, we have an hour-long training that we're going to be doing first. So if you wanted to log back in around 7 o'clock, that's when we'll be getting that portion of the agenda.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
That way you don't have to, you can go
I'll
get
go
some
have
dinner and enjoy your dinner and get back to us.
All right, I'll be back at 7. Thanks, fellas.
Great. Thanks for your comments, Matt.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Let's see. Andrea, did we have any other?
No, Chair, that was the only person who signed up to speak.
Great. Thank you very much. And I should recognize, by the way, I think the script still called you the senior admin, but I do believe that you've been promoted to city clerk. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Well, congratulations. I know that's not a
Thank
part of
you.
the script, but I just wanted to make note of that. Thank you. Let me scroll back down. So we'll move to regular business. The first item of regular business this evening is review and consideration of the July 28th tool. Did I open the correct ones? Is it July 28th?
No, you opened the wrong script.
Of course I did. That's why it's wrong.
I'm like, I have the script in front of me.
Let's
Number
see.
22nd minutes.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes, those minutes. So may I have a motion to approve the minutes of, what did we say? October
September
2nd?
22nd.
September 22nd. Thank you.
So moved. Seconded.
Let's see, that was moved by Victor, I believe, and
And me.
seconded by Commissioner
Okay.
Boatsman.
No, I moved. I think Ted seconded. And I think
All
Vic
right.
as well. So you can forget mine.
Everybody's jumped in. Okay, we have a motion and a second. I know there were a few comments that the city clerk wanted to mention. Andrea, do you want to mention those first, and then we'll go to the rest of the group?
Yep, just that there was a couple scrivenger's errors on there. I left off the date at the top. I had a line that said all commissioners were present when Commissioner Murphy was absent, and the numbering was off under regular business. So those are all just scrivener's errors that I have fixed.
Great. Perfect. Does anybody else have any corrections, comments on the minutes from September 22nd? Okay, hearing none. We will do a quick roll call vote of approval of the minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair Weinberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Friedman,
Aye.
Chair Hubble,
Aye.
Commissioner Rashish,
Aye.
Commissioner Goodman,
Aye.
Commissioner Boatsman,
I
and Commissioner Murphy.
Abstain, I wasn't there, so.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. The minutes pass 601. And with that, it brings us to item number 2 on the agenda, which is training related to the city's recent adoption of code of ethics policy. And I think Eileen, are you leading us through that this evening?
I am. Hi, everyone. My name is Eileen Kiefer. I'm with Madrona Law Group. I provide basically backup services for BO, your normal city attorney. I think I know most of you guys from our work on the telecom ordinance or just through other matters. So I'm excited to see everybody again. And we'll be going through a PowerPoint presentation on Mercer Island's new and improved code of ethics. It's probably going to take about 40 to 45 minutes, and we're going to have a few moments for questions at the end. But I may pause, about halfway through, see if you guys have any questions. But if you have questions too that pop up, feel free to interrupt. That's just fine.
And Andrea, if I can just, sorry, Eileen, if I can interrupt for one moment, I realized I just want to reiterate that we have a number of people participating from other boards and commissions from the city that are joining us. So for anyone joining from the public, if you see extra folks, they are also participating in their capacity as commissioners.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen real briefly. I've got a bunch of PowerPoint slides too, and I'll tell you, we'll email those to you guys afterwards. We didn't want you to you didn't want to spoil the surprise of the ethics presentation before you get to it. So. Okay. Are you guys able to see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, great.
Eileen, we see presentation mode. Oh, there we go.
Okay, I was like, I switched the screens, so it should be all good. Thanks, Andrea. Okay, so again, welcome to ethics training for City of Mercer Island officials. This will be your introduction to the new and improved ethics policy. Council spent a lot of time going through and revamping the ethics policy earlier this year. I think this was adopted early this summer. And so we'll go over both the Mercer Island Code of Ethics and then as well as some applicable statutory provisions. Sometimes the statute will intersect with the Code of Ethics, and sometimes the Code of Ethics actually requires more of what the statute requires. And we'll go over how these all work together as we go through the presentation. And then first too, I have kind of a lawyerly disclaimer before we start, is taking this ethics training is good. And my goal for this is to not have you guys memorize the Code of Ethics or memorize the statutes. I want you guys to be able to issue spot. So if you think you have a problem, you think you have a conflict of interest or a beneficial interest in a contract, or somebody's trying to give you a gift you can't receive, hey, this is where my Code of Ethics lives, and here are the resources available to me in interpreting this Code of Ethics. So just take this kind of with that framework in mind. And then also just be aware too that taking this training is no defense against an ethics complaint. We'll get to how all of that works kind of near the end of the presentation. So at the beginning, why even have a Code of Ethics? Why do we bother to have this special chapter in the Mercer Island City Code? And it's pretty straightforward, right? The goal is so that Mercer Island residents and businesses get fair, ethical, and accountable local government. And the idea is really just to protect the public trust. And you'll notice too on this first slide, I've got the Code of Ethics citation here in the bottom right corner. That's just to orient you as to where these requirements live for future reference. Okay, so Mercer Island's Code of Ethics lives in Chapter 2.60 of the Mercer Island City Code. It was revised just this summer. It is supplemental to state statute. The most crucial piece of state statute will be RCW Chapter 4223, which is the Code of Ethics for Municipal Officers. And we'll be discussing that and how it intersects with the Code of Ethics later on in this presentation. And the code of ethics applies to city council, city boards and commissions, which is why you guys are getting this training today, and other council appointed task groups or committees. The expectations of city officials are set forth in the preamble of the code of ethics. I'm going to kind of go through this pretty quickly, but just know these are the expectations, right? Honoring and respecting the spirit and principles of representative government, complying with laws and policies affecting the operations of government, conducting both your official and your personal affairs so as to maintain public confidence in city government, to make sure that that residents have the clear impression that city officials can't be improperly influenced in the performance of their official duties. City officials are also expected to be independent, impartial, and fair in judgment and actions. City officials must not use their power and resources for personal gain. They're supposed to use those only to advance the best interests of the city and its residents. City officials need to conduct public deliberations and processes openly, unless in a legally confidential, like executive session, in an atmosphere of respect and civility. And finally, city officials are expected to be honest, fair, and respectful, and to avoid creating any appearances of impropriety. Okay, so prohibited conduct. We're going to get straight into the things you essentially cannot do as city officials, and this follows chronologically to or in order as the ethics code treats these subjects. So first, we're going to discuss conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest are prohibited under the Mercer Island Code of Ethics, and where an official has a conflict of interest, they must recuse themselves from both the deliberations and the voting for that particular topic that they are conflicted out of. So again, so it's more than just recusing yourself not to vote. It's no participating in the discussion at all. This makes sense when you think about it. If you can't vote, then it makes sense that you can't, speak to and perhaps persuade others on a matter that you have a conflict of interest on. So what exactly is a conflict of interest? And know the Code of Ethics has a long laundry list of definitions. We're going to go through those, and know too that when you're working through some of these concepts, if you ever have an issue, the definitions are going to be really key to working through that issue. So a conflict of interest is when the official spouse, any individual who the official lives with, or an entity that the official serves as either an employee, an officer, director, trustee, partner, or owner, stands to incur financial gain or loss related to a city decision. And what is a financial gain or loss? This is an interlocking definition, so you have to look at this as well to determine whether you have a conflict of interest potentially. So financial gain or loss is any material financial gain or loss that an individual or entity stands to incur as a result of decision under consideration by the city. There's a couple of exceptions from the definition of financial gain or loss. The term doesn't include payment of generally applicable taxes or fees, or financial interest shared with more than 10% of the city's population. This makes sense otherwise, especially with taxes or fees. If everyone had a conflict of interest on taxes or fees, no one in the city could vote on them. Okay. So that was conflicts of interest. And I think conflicts of interest is helpful to when we talk about our next prohibited act, which is appearance of conflicts. Appearance of conflicts is another issue or item that requires particular restraints on action if any official has an appearance of a conflict of interest. That's because sometimes you might not have a conflict of interest as such as defined, as we just went over, but you might have something that might look to someone to be an appearance of conflict, and that can be damaging to the public trust. So how do you know if you have just the appearance of a conflict as opposed to a conflict of interest? You have an appearance of a conflict if it appears to a reasonable person who has knowledge of the relevant circumstances that the official's judgment could be impaired either because of a personal or business relationship or a transaction or activity that the official is engaged in. So note that this is a bit broader, right, than the definition of conflict of interest, and that's intentional. So an appearance of conflicts can be triggered by relationships that maybe aren't relevant for the conflict of interest definition. So maybe, a personal relationship that's not your spouse or somebody you live with, maybe it's a sibling or a cousin or an in-law, or other transactions or activity engaged in by the official. So think about this as could be, volunteer activities or other things that you may be involved with that may not give rise to a conflict of interest. So just know this definition is somewhat broad. And if you have an appearance of a conflict of interest, then you don't have to recuse yourself. But what you should do is you will need to make a public written disclosure of the facts giving rise to that appearance of a conflict before participating in the matter. So just essentially making full disclosure of what's giving rise to the appearance of a conflict, so it's available to the public that you have an appearance of a conflict of interest, and that's disclosed. I'll note some officials will recuse even if they're not required to, just for appearance's sake, but that is not required under the Code of Ethics for appearances of conflicts. Okay, so moving on to our next concept, which are beneficial interests in contracts. The Code of Ethics prohibits officials from being beneficially interested in contracts that might be made by, through, or under their supervision, either in whole or in part, or that might be made for the benefit of their office. And I'll note this is going to be one of the areas where there's some overlap and some bleed over with the statute. So I'll talk about that in just a second. Additionally, the Code of Ethics with respect to contracts provides that officials cannot accept, either directly or indirectly, any compensation, gratuity, or reward in connection with a contract from any other person beneficially interested therein. So this really speaks to things like, commissions, finder's fees, referral fees, that type of thing. Okay. And so how does the code define beneficial interest? A beneficial interest is any direct or indirect monetary or material benefit accruing to an official as a result of contracts or transactions that are or might be the subject of an official act or action by or with the city. There's a few exceptions from this definition. The exceptions are for contracts or transactions which confer similar benefits to all other persons or properties similarly situated. And I note here too that there can be some conflict or maybe some overlap perhaps between the Code of Ethics definition of beneficial interest in a contract and a conflict of interest. You'll remember with the conflicts of interest, recusal is the appropriate remedy. For beneficial interest in contracts, this is actually something that comes from state statute. The prohibition is against the contract ever being formed unless there's an exemption. So just know that there can, depending on what the code is prohibiting, and if it's prohibiting two different things, the remedies may be different. Just be aware of that. Take some caution, and you're welcome to call me. You're welcome to call BO. We're going to talk about advisory opinions from the ethics officer a little bit later. Just know that there are some resources available as you work through these concepts. Okay. And I've got some examples here of beneficial interests, and I am picking on council here, and because they're kind of the easier examples. These are going to be pretty straightforward examples, but they're certainly not the only examples. Beneficial interest in a contract. So for example, a professional services agreement to hire a council member's company as a consultant for the city. A contract for supplies to the city from a company owned by a council member's spouse. or sale or lease of land by a council member to the city. There are some exceptions. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I hear a
I just
question?
had one question. You may
Sure.
bring it up, and I don't know if you want questions now, but
That's great.
is there a time bound to any of that? Like, there's no mention of how, like, if that's I'll leave it open ended. Is there a time bound to how and when that conflict? Like, if it was a transaction that had occurred 2 years prior, and then now there's some sort of thing happening in front of this, like if there was some sort of personal interest or direct or indirect monetary benefit, or maybe somebody consulted with somebody years ago,
Yeah.
and now they're coming before the city. Like, it's unclear to me in this language whether it's at any time there was any interaction, or is it time bound in some way?
So I'll give you my opinion. This is obviously, no defense to any ethics complaint, but my best advice here on this is for things that have happened in the past, they're probably not going to be included in this definition. So the definition requires a direct or monetary or material benefit as a result of the contract. So for example, if you had some sort of relationship with the consultant who's subject, who is trying to contract with the city, but that consultant is not, I don't know, promising you, you get 5% of the contract if the contract passes with the city. If there's no direct or monetary benefit from that contract, then there's no beneficial interest. There might be an appearance of a conflict that you might need to disclose. So like I said, there can be some overlap between these concepts. So, but past actions without any, immediate, indirect or direct monetary or material benefit, I don't think that's going to fit the definition of a beneficial interest. So now promises of future that may fall under this definition. It may fall under the definition of a conflict of interest. I think it would really just depend on the facts.
Great, thank you.
It's a typical lawyer answer, right? It depends. Okay. So back to the exceptions. So the exceptions are specified in the statute, specifically RCW section 4223.030. I have not listed the long laundry list of exceptions because frankly, a lot of them aren't applicable to Mercer Island. A lot of them are applicable to very small municipalities, think like Town of Friday Harbor, City of Roslyn, very small populations. Some of them do apply, but a lot of them are just very specific circumstances. So again, I'm not going to cover all of these. Just know this is the section of the statute that they live in. If you have questions, you're in doubt, call BO, call me. And again, there's this option of the advisory opinion from the ethics officer that we're going to touch more on later. I'll note for, I believe we have at least one utility board member that there is one subsection that may be applicable. It relates to the furnishing of electrical, water, or other utility services by a municipality engaged in the business of furnishing such services at the same rates and on the same terms as are available to the public generally. So again, there may be something that may be applicable to the utility board's function.
Thank you.
Okay. If there is an exception to this prohibition of a beneficial interest in the contract, what is the official to do? Okay. In this circumstance, then the city can still form the contract, but the official who has the exception needs to recuse themselves. They cannot vote in the authorization, approval, or ratification of a contract they're beneficially interested in, even if there's an exception. Additionally, the official's interests must be disclosed publicly and noted in the city's official minutes before the formation of the contract. Additionally, with respect to beneficial interest in contracts, know that there are also exemptions, which are different from exceptions. Again, this is kind of a lawyerly concept, but I'm going to try to break it down as easily as I can. The idea is remote interests are so de minimis, so small, that the statute and the Code of Ethics don't consider them to be a beneficial interest at all. So remote interests are things like being a non-salaried officer of a nonprofit corporation, being an employee or an agent of a contracting party where the compensation is just fixed wages or salary, no commissions. So for example, if one of you work for Amazon and you have, a fixed salary, that doesn't necessarily mean the city can never have any contracts with Amazon. Other remote interests are those of a landlord or tenant of a contracting party, or that of a holder of less than 1% of the shares of a corporation or cooperative, which is a contracting party. So again, a remote interest is so small that the law does not recognize that as being a beneficial interest in a contract. I'll note that if you do have a remote interest, there are still things that the Code of Ethics and the law requires you to do before the contract is formed. So that remote interest must be disclosed and noted in the minutes. Again, the official cannot vote on the item, and the official cannot deliberate, either in public or even in private, cannot influence or attempt to influence any other officer of the city to enter into the contract. Okay, so moving on to the prohibition against use of city staff time or property in improper manners. This is all going to be, I think, pretty straightforward for you guys, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. Officials can't use public resources not available to the public in general, so like city staff time, equipment, supplies, facilities, for things other than your official duties. This is just to safeguard taxpayer resources. And there is an exception for infrequent use at little or no cost to the city. City officials are also prohibited from representing third parties at city proceedings. So you cannot appear on the financial interests of third parties before bodies on which you serve or in interaction with assigned staff. And then note too, there's a prohibition here that applies to the city council about they cannot appear on behalf of the financial interest of third parties before either council or any of you all, any of your boards, commissions, or any other proceeding of the city or in interaction with staff. Gifts and favors, I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but I will note just kind of the high points. Public officials can't take special advantages of the services or opportunities of personal gain not available to the public. So officials can't solicit or receive anything of monetary value. If that has been solicited or is being given for the purposes of getting or obtaining special consideration or to influence your actions in your official capacity. And I'll note too, because it is election season, this prohibition does not include lawful campaign contributions. There are some, yes.
Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
You're getting two exceptions, that's how I wanted to.
There's a
aren't there exceptions to that?
There's a long laundry list of exceptions. We'll go through them. Know that there's a long laundry list though. So for the most common one that I see are like unsolicited flowers, plants, and floral arrangements. A lot of times those get sent to, to city officials because residents are happy. They're happy with you, especially with like front desk staff. They're you've done something, they want to commend you. That's okay. Unsolicited advertising or promotional items of nominal value, so like pens. I note here the nominal value, so any unsolicited, promotional iPads, please be cautious before accepting those. Plaques and trophies, other awards of appreciation that are unsolicited are fine. Food and beverages consumed at hosted reception if you are attending in your official duties. admission to and the cost of food and beverages consumed at events sponsored by or in conjunction with civic, charitable, governmental, or community organizations. Some of these exceptions are so funny to me. Unsolicited gifts from dignitaries from another city, state, or foreign country that are intended to be personal in nature. This doesn't happen very often, but if I don't know if Mercer Island's twinned with any other cities, so maybe that would happen. Food and beverages on infrequent occasions in the ordinary course of meals if you are attending in the performance of your official duties. And the last one, gifts from family members or friends for your birthday, for holidays, that kind of a thing, where it's clear this is a personal gift and it's not relating to your official duties. Those are just fine. The Code of Ethics also prohibits city officials from disclosing confidential information. So, for example, for Planning Commission especially, sometimes you deal with us attorneys, and Planning Commission sometimes has executive sessions with attorneys to discuss the legal risks relating to particular courses of action. So disclosing what would happen, what has occurred in an executive session, forwarding attorney-client privileged email, those are prohibited by the Code of Ethics. And with executive session, I'll note too, there is an OPMA prohibition against disclosing executive session contents as well. And then additionally to note that any confidential, I don't think this happens very much, any confidential information used for like personal gain. So for example, if you guys have reason to believe that the city is going to, I don't know, purchase a piece of property and it's confidential at that point in time, no, tipping off your neighbor that, hey, you might want to buy this piece of property because the city's going to need it and you can make a quick buck that way. So these are the kinds of things that the Code of Ethics prohibits. And then I'll note too, the statute has also a list of prohibited acts. A lot of them are really duplicative of the Code of Ethics prohibitions that we just went over. So I'm really going to just skip over these, but just know there's a few out there. The one I do want to touch on though is this one here about municipal officers being unable to accept employment or engage in business or professional activity by which you would reasonably be expected to have to disclose confidential information acquired by reason of your official position. So this really means like if you are going to end up taking any sort of activity where you're going to have to disclose any sort of confidential information you learn as a result of your board or commission seat, that's going to be prohibited under the statute. Probably unlikely, but noting it just in case that occurs. Okay. And I'm going to pause right here. We are well more than halfway, which is probably a relief. This is kind of a dry topic. I just want to pause here though and see if there's any questions. Okay.
Any questions from the group? Seeing none, Eileen, I'll just ask one for clarity, because the language, of course, is very legalese, and I think this is one.
Totally.
The most frequent that I think any or all of us may find ourselves in at any given point in time, as we very regularly will meet with residents just to talk about items of, hey, what's going on with this piece of business? And it is not uncommon for the offer to be made to purchase a cup of coffee, for example, which may be only a couple of dollars. And I do know that I just want to understand, I know how I interpret this, but I think that's the one that would probably most frequently come up amongst folks. And I think it would lend some clarity as to whether or not that's advisable or not.
Sure. Yeah, I totally get that. That makes perfect sense. And frankly, I was raised in the South, so declining a cup of coffee or a cup of tea can actually be rude. So I get that. I think that would fit under this exception about food and beverages on infrequent occasions in the ordinary course of meals where attendance by the officials relating to the performance of your official duties. I to me, that seems to be one that would make sense to me. Is that you're sitting down with them in your capacity as a planning commission member or other board or commission member. They're buying you a cup of coffee. If it's every day, if it's every week, then you might want to think about how that looks. Again, this says infrequent occasions, but if it's a one-time thing or even twice, I don't think I'd worry too much about it. That's a great question.
Great. Yeah, I know whenever I ask for someone's time, I always offer to pay and just saying, hey, thank you for your time. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was clear to everybody. It's the one that I think would probably be the most likely to run across. So.
Right. And this is you guys receiving cups of coffee as well. So if you guys want to pay, for other people, I'm not aware of anything in the Code of Ethics that prohibits that. Okay. So we're going to move on. Sorry, if I can get to the right slides. Ethics officer. I am, like I said, we're more than halfway through. The ethics officer, I'm going to focus on parts that are most applicable to you guys. And then I am going to give you a brief overview of ethics complaints. I hope that's not something any of you all need to know in depth, but we'll go over just kind of the bare basics. And again, there's resources available if you have in-depth questions. Okay. So the city has appointed an ethics officer. It's a lawyer at a third-party law firm, but he does not act basically as a lawyer for the city. He acts as the city's ethics officer. He is responsible for the prompt and fair enforcement of the city code of ethics when he is called upon to do so. He has two main roles, which is to investigate the sufficiency of submitted ethics complaints. And then the part that's going to be most key for you guys is that he provides advisory opinions for officials who are subject to the code of ethics upon request. So advisory opinions. Advisory opinions are a way for you guys to get kind of an official opinion about a particular course of action relating to your particular circumstances. So officials subject to the code of ethics can request written advisory opinions from the ethics officer regarding hypothetical circumstances or situations just related to them. So you can't ask about situations relating to other officials. The ethics officer is kind of limited in his scope. He can't render opinion on matters that are the purview of other government agencies or officials. So like the Public Disclosure Commission, the city's public records officer, etc. And he has the sole discretion to determine in what cases he's going to issue an advisory opinion. These are just what he's going to consider when determining what cases in which to issue an advisory opinion. Really, the ethics officer is going to look at whether or not the issue's been recently addressed, whether it's likely to be the subject of controversy, and to the extent at which the requesting official has made prior requests for advisory opinions. I'll note too, again, more legalese, but it's important. The advisory opinion process is just not a substitute for an official's understanding of the code of ethics and the exercise of reasonable judgment. Oh, and a note too here on timing. Under the code of ethics, the ethics officer technically has 45 days in which to issue an advisory opinion. 45 days is a long time, but the code of ethics provides that the ethics officer can expedite the provision of an advisory opinion if requested, if the requester expresses urgency in the request. So if you have a question about something on an agenda item that's coming up in 2 weeks and you want to ask for an advisory opinion, I would strongly recommend that you put pretty conspicuously in a request for an advisory opinion that you need a turnaround time by a certain date. That will help the ethics officer know, okay, this is a request for an expedited opinion.
Given that we rarely know our agendas more than a week or two in advance, I'm not sure the 45 days is well thought through, but
it is a month and a half. It's a very long time. Yeah. So advisory opinions. The benefit of advisory opinions is that generally an official who relies on an advisory opinion will not be found to violate the code of ethics with respect to civil enforcement. There's a couple of caveats to this, right? Its caveat that's contingent on the material facts being accurately presented to the ethics officer, with the official's conduct being consistent with what the ethics officer recommended. And it's also contingent on the ethics officer issuing an advisory opinion that permits the conduct, that says that the described conduct would not violate the code of ethics.
Eileen, it looks like we have 2 questions.
Oh, great. Thank you. I have like the slides up, so I appreciate y'all flagging that.
Yeah, Andrea beat me to it. Let's go first with Victor and then Colin.
Thanks. If you could just go one more slide back.
Sure.
Just out of curiosity, why is whether a requesting official has made prior requests something that's considered?
You know, that's a good question. And frankly, I didn't write the code of ethics, so I'm not entirely sure why that's in there. My best guess is it's to prevent basically abuse of the advisory opinion process. If somebody is requesting, maybe every 2 weeks, they're requesting an advisory opinion before every meeting. I think that's what that's aimed at, but frankly, I can't tell you exactly why.
Okay, thank you. It makes sense.
Colin.
Thank you. Given that, sort of maybe the first line of defense, Eileen, is you and Bio, if we have a question, can you give me an example where we might just kind of jump right over you and go straight to an advisory opinion? Like, is there a grade of concern that we should keep in mind, or would you recommend that a normal course of action be talk to one of the 2 of you and then maybe be referred to the advisory, opinion from there?
Sure. I mean, I think where Bio and I can be the most help is, if you need an advisory opinion, kind of walking you through like what would that look like and what will the ethics officer need to make a decision. I think we can really help with that respect. I don't know that there's a threshold of, just talking to me and Bio would be okay. I think the benefit is if you get an advisory opinion, it's this defense, right? Is that it's defense to civil enforcement. So if you but Bio and I can't issue our own advisory opinions. So I think that's really what you would consider, as opposed to like whether or not to talk to Bio and me, or to just go straight to the advisory opinion. And you can certainly do both. I don't know if that helps. But
yeah,
you can,
I think so.
You can skip us too. That's quite okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That helps. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you have a time crunch, you might want to skip us, and we'll endeavor to get to this, relatively quickly, especially if you have a time crunch. Okay. What's fun about this is it's like I get different, this is my 3rd time going through this, and I get different questions at each time, which I love. Okay, the complaint process. We're going to go through this pretty quickly because it can be kind of lengthy, and I've already taken 35 minutes of your time. So we'll go through this quickly. Okay, complaints. How are they initiated? So any person, so it doesn't even have to be a resident of Mercer Island, any person can submit a written complaint to the ethics officer alleging one or more violations of the code of ethics. They do so by filing it with Andrea, our city clerk. The complaint must be sufficiently detailed for the ethics officer to make a determination of sufficiency. And it must state what specific subsections of the Mercer Island City Code, the ethics policy, are alleged to have been violated. And it must be signed under penalty of perjury. These are all requirements to make sure, or to hopefully prevent, complaints that are political in nature, frivolous, harassing, that kind of a thing. Another safeguard, again, against frivolous political complaints is this notion of the finding of sufficiency. So the ethics officer, if he receives an ethics complaint forwarded from Andrea, he will make a determination of sufficiency within 30 days of receiving the complaint. And so this notion of sufficiency, we've got another legal definition here. A complaint is sufficient if it precisely alleges and reasonably describes acts that on their face would show that there's a violation of the ethics code, including chapter 42.23 RCW. There's a note here on confidentiality that is written into your ethics code. And I've got, excuse me. Sorry, I'm going to take a quick moment.
Too much talking.
Gosh, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so this note on confidentiality. The ethics policy provides that the city will try to maintain as confidential the fact that a complaint has been filed, what the contents of that complaint are, the identity of the person making complaints, and the identity of the official who is the subject of the complaint prior to this determination of sufficiency, unless otherwise provided by law. So this is really striving to protect officers before we even know if the complaint is sufficient. And I'll note too, I think there should be basically a big asterisk by except as otherwise provided by law, because as you all know, city documents are subject to the Public Records Act. It could be that a Public Records Act that is timed prior to and due before a determination of sufficiency might override this confidentiality provision. So the city will endeavor to do this as much as possible, but to the extent they have to disclose under other law, just be aware of this. If a complaint is insufficient, then the ethics officer will dismiss it. Similarly, if the complaint provides too little detail for the ethics officer to make a determination, or it seems that an ethics violation may have occurred, but there's appropriate actions that have been taken to address and remedy the conduct, then again, the ethics officer will dismiss the complaint. Hearings. I'm not going to skip through all of this, but I'm going to kind of skim and go quicker here. So if the ethics officer finds a complaint to be sufficient, that doesn't necessarily mean the officer has been found to have violated the code of ethics. It just means the complaint proceeds along to a hearing. That would be heard in front of the city's hearing examiner, the same hearings examiner that hears preliminary plat hearings and appeals and code enforcement cases. It's the same hearing examiner. In those kinds of proceedings, each party can present and cross-examine witnesses, give relevant evidence before the hearing examiner, and the hearing examiner's role will really be to prepare an official record of the hearing. His role is really to serve as a fact finder and to suss out all of the facts relating to ethics complaints. Within 30 days after the conclusion of the hearing examiner will issue a final decision in writing. If the hearing examiner determines that the complaint has not been proven, then he'll dismiss the complaint and that's the end of it. No further action shall be taken. If the hearing examiner does decide that, sorry, my slides are off here. Okay, so if the hearing examiner comes to the conclusion that there has been an ethics violation, then he'll make a recommendation to the city council. And that decision will be forwarded to the city council. Ultimately, for code of ethics violations, the city council has essentially the last say at the city level. They will take action on the hearing examiner's final decision, either within 30 days or at the next regularly scheduled council meeting following that 30-day period. And really, if city council decides to act upon the ethics officer's recommended stipulation or the hearing examiner's recommended remedial actions, they'll do so in a public meeting through a majority vote. Potential outcomes from these hearings could be no sanctions or penalties, Can be referral of the matter to another agency with jurisdiction, like the Public Disclosure Commission. Council might admonish the official, which is an oral non-public statement. They might reprimand the official, which is the issuance of a letter. They might censure the official, which is a letter read to the official in public. They can remove the official, and then the Code of Ethics also provides for civil penalties. Know that there is an appeal proceeding or appeal possibility from City Council's action. So either the official who is complained against or the person making the complaint can appeal to King County Superior Court if they are, if they don't agree with the City Council's decision. Finally, just some final notes for kind of drawing to the close here of the presentation. The Code of Ethics does provide a protection against retaliation for those who are making a complaint with the ethics officer. And then a final note on public records, which I mentioned earlier. The city documents are subject to the Public Records Act. Generally, my general rule of thumb is unless exempted, records are public and open to the public. So be aware that records of the ethics officer and the hearing examiner become public records that might be subject to an inspection unless there's an exemption. And then if the city receives a public records request and reasonably determines that such information may be exempt, one of the options it has is to notify the complaining party and the official who is the subject of the complaint that unless they go to court and get an injunction, that the records will be released. So they give a certain amount of time to allow folks who may be subject to these documents to go get an injunction to prohibit their release. And with that, that's the end of the presentation. And I'm open for any other questions you may have.
Thank you, Eileen. Does anyone have any additional questions or clarifications that they want? Tiffin?
Thanks. I just had a clarification at the end, how you indicated the ethics officer decision might go to City Council. I'm trying to imagine a scenario in which that would happen, because I was kind of understanding the ethics officer either kind of stopped the process or forwarded it to the hearing examiner.
Yes, and I think I'm rolling to that. And I'm sorry, I don't think I explained that very well. So I think the city I think that's a really good question. So typically the way it's going to work is, ethics officer makes a finding of sufficiency. If it's sufficient, then it goes from ethics officer to hearing examiner. From hearing examiner, if not dismissed, goes to City Council. I think what this slide is referring to is if there is a stipulation, so like a settlement of the ethics complaint, then that's when, or maybe that's a type, Tiffin, that may be a typo. Let me go back and look at the Code of Ethics too, just to make sure that I have.
It is in there. I read it. You're not wrong.
Okay.
But I just don't understand it.
I'm like having to pull up. But I think that refers to when you might be settling out a complaint, because it could be just like with any, I kind of think of this as any other piece of litigation or like an administrative hearing. It might settle before you go to trial. And so perhaps that's what that is referring to. But let me refresh my memory on the ethics policy on this particular NIT. And I'll send y'all a note of follow-up on that, because at first I thought, oh, this is a typo, and now it's not. So let me double check and send y'all a note.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Is that a question?
Yeah.
So am I understanding correctly that you're saying if the hearing examiner decides to dismiss the complaint, the council does not have the right to override that and to say, we realize this during that the hearing examiner didn't like this, but we're going to reprimand anyway. Is that correct?
That's how I read the code. That's exactly how I read the code.
Any other questions or clarifications? Well, thank you, Eileen. Is there anything that we need to do to, other than having been present, anything we need to do to register our participation in this training? I know at work I have to attest to something in a written thing after I finish my training. So
Right, right. I don't think so. I mean, Andrea has been working hard and as well as anybody else who's running these meetings, to have an accurate count of who's in attendance. I think what we'll do is we'll go through, we'll make sure everybody's attended one. And the nice thing is these have all been recorded. So I can maybe recommend the one where I feel like it was the smoothest presentation for those who were absent from any of the meetings. So you guys have all been
this
counted.
one.
Yeah, exactly. You guys have all been counted, and just thanks for being good sports about this. Again, it's kind of a dry topic, but it's really important, and just appreciate y'all giving me the time, and thanks for the great questions. Y'all had totally new, totally different questions, and always nice to hear different questions, see different ways of looking at it.
I'll ask with that. This is always my interview question that I ask. Is there something that we didn't ask that we should have?
I don't think so. I'm going through here and seeing. I don't think there really was. And you guys didn't ask any incriminating questions about, well, if this person wants to buy me a car for a zoning change, what do I do? So no, I think y'all are good. Again, we'll send around the slides afterwards, and those have, my info. It's got Bio's info. So if y'all think of other questions too, just give us a holler.
Great. Thank you, Eileen. And thank you to the other commissioners that have joined us this evening for the first portion of our meeting. I believe, Andrea, they are all dismissed. And if I can, for the rest of the commissioners, maybe we take a quick 5-minute bio break, and we'll reconvene here. It's 7:03 on my watch. So let's go 7:10. Let's reconvene.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you. We'll wait one more moment for Tiffin to return. All right. Andrea, are you there? Are you ready for us to start?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the last hour. We'll now move to item number 3 on our agenda this evening, related to ZTR 21-004, related to the town center commercial requirements. We began the conversation last time, and this is a continuation of that conversation. Before we begin, however, I wanted to just quickly give the floor to Commissioner Rashish, who I believe had just a comment he wanted to add.
Sure, thanks, Chair Hubble. I just wanted to address the Planning Commission and the public to let them know that prior to tonight's town center discussion, kind of hot on the heels of our ethics training, I sought the opinion of our ethics officer regarding my participation in tonight's meeting. As I'm sure all of you know, I'm a business owner in the town center, and I wanted to make sure that there was no conflict of interest with my participating in tonight's discussion, nor did I want the appearance of a conflict of interest. So the ethics officer issued an opinion that it would not be a conflict of interest for me to participate. And I would just ask that the opinion that was issued to be entered into the public record.
Great, thank you very much. And I believe, Madam Clerk, you have a copy of that opinion.
Yes, Chair, that has been entered into the record.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you, Victor, for taking the time to do that. And the timing was perfect given our training this evening. So with that, I believe we have Sarah and Jeff this evening with us to walk us through a number of some additional conversation related to the town center commercial requirements. Before we get started, I just want to make the note that a couple of items. One, we're not making any decisions this evening. If you'll recall, our next meeting, I believe in 2 weeks, we have a public hearing for this. And so we would not be doing any deliberation or making any substantive changes until that time. So tonight, I think, is going to be information sharing. We have both information from Jeff and Sarah, as I believe Commissioner Murphy has also provided some additional information. And we didn't have a chance, Mike, to chat beforehand, but what I'm going to suggest this evening is maybe that we can talk to it and then provide the commission the time over the next few weeks to do some continued homework related to that content so that we can have a proper deliberation after the public hearing, if that's acceptable.
Yeah.
Great. So with that, I'll leave it to Jeff. Are you running the show?
Sarah's going to run the show as usual, but I do have a couple of introductory remarks, if I may, before handing it off to Sarah. Chair, you hit the nail on the head there with your comment. Just to cover again, no decisions are going to get made tonight. This is a work session tonight. It's the second work session. Your first session was on September 22nd, which largely focused on covering how we arrived at this point. Tonight, what we're going to do here is walk you through the actual amendments to the Municipal Code, Chapter 1911, that would be required to implement the direction that was received by City Council back in September. And then, of course, as the chair already covered, on November 3rd, the commission will hold a public hearing on these proposed code amendments, and then we'll enter into deliberations. One other quick thing I did want to cover really quick. We did, and apologies from staff, it was a little later in the day than we had hoped. We did send out via email a matrix of questions and answers for the commission to take a look at, and that was follow-up from the meeting on September 22nd. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that yet, please do, and we're going to try and cover the vast majority of it throughout the evening here this evening.
Great, and I see, sorry, Jeff, I see a question here from Victor.
Just,
Yeah, sure.
is anyone else's image being truncated on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you for letting me know, because it was showing up weird on my end as well. So let me try resharing again. Hold on just a second. How does it look now?
Perfect.
Much better.
Good.
Okay, great. Thank you. You know, a billion months into this, and it's always something. So thank you for letting me know. Again, Sarah Bluvis, Economic Development Coordinator for the city. I am running a brief PowerPoint tonight, so I hope Jeff doesn't think he's getting completely off the hook of running the show, but I am going to just walk you all through the code amendments that were included in your agenda packet. As Jeff mentioned, we sent out a matrix of comments and responses from the last meeting, which we can go through after this brief presentation for the public record. If you have questions, feel free to jump in. It's only a handful of slides, so it may be more beneficial to just wait after the fact when we begin the discussion. So with that, 2 simple agenda items on my end, presenting the draft code amendments and then discussing them. So as you recall from our September meeting, as well as through your agenda packet, there are kind of 3 main elements to the proposed code amendments. The first is related to the Pink Lines map, which is included as figure 2 in the current chapter 1911-020B, titled the Retail Use Required Adjacent to Street Frontages map. So the first proposed amendment is to replace that Pink Lines map that's currently in the code with the map to the right. We discussed this map briefly in the last meeting with you all, and Jeff and I pointed out a few additions that had been made, as well as a few deletions we were recommending. And so the new map on the right, which was also included in your packet, reflects those changes. It also attempts to, again, reflect the corridor concentration on Southeast 27th and 78th Avenue. And then it doesn't include the public and utility owned properties that are at the end of 78th. The second piece is the meatier piece that we spent a lot of time introducing at the last meeting, the Town Center Commercial FAR, the floor area ratio, excuse me. So for this amendment, we propose inserting the commercial FAR provision as a new section 2 in chapter 1911-020. That is the typo I see right there. I won't read this off of the screen. It was included in your packet, but we inserted some very brief language about the FAR and how it would be applied. The map to the right would be inserted as a figure 3 to demonstrate the parcel subject to the FAR. And then the section also includes guidance for how to round when the FAR calculation results in a fraction. So, round up if it's 0.5 or above, round down, etc. And then the final major piece is the inclusion of the no net loss provision. We, again, have been discussing this in relation to the properties identified in the map to the right, those kind of orange parcels, which are parcels that have been developed post 2005 and which we don't necessarily think will redevelop on the time horizon that's been identified for this project. So again, we propose inserting this map into a new section 3. And then, oh, sorry, excuse me. So we just have brief language again related to that, and it would include the map as well. And the other piece we talked about with you all, and that has come up in other conversations throughout this process, relates to eligible commercial issues or uses. So in the last Planning Commission meeting with you all, there was some questions raised about how we're defining commercial and a desire to clarify the terminology. To date, the eligible uses have been framed in these 3 categories of restaurant, retail, and personal services. And I provided the definitions from MICC 1916 definitions chapter here. Restaurant is an establishment where food and drink are prepared and consumed. Such establishment may also provide catering services. Retail, an establishment engaged in selling goods or merchandise and rendering services incidental to the sale of such goods. Those 2 are relatively straightforward. One area where we may, if the Planning Commission is interested in kind of defining the uses a little more clearly, we may suggest looking at the personal services definition. Right now, it is very much tied to personal grooming and health. So that would cover uses such as barbershops, hairstylists, spas, the many fitness studios and nail salons around the island, or in town center, excuse me. But we had a lot of questions come up, where do banks fit in, for example? Are they a retail establishment or are they a professional services? We also have some other kind of unique businesses on the island, travel agents, and a very well beloved car wash and that kind of thing. And in conversation with Jeff, and this is open to conversation with the Planning Commission should you choose to take up this piece and want to explore it a little more. But in conversation with Jeff, we thought that perhaps it could be solved incorporating these businesses by amending the personal services definition to include something to the effect of personal affairs or something similar. So that's one piece. We haven't recommended any proposed amendments to accomplish the goal of clarifying the terminology. We really just wanted to bring this to your attention, how it's defined in the code currently and areas where we think we may be able to adjust to better clarify.
Sarah, can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
And you may not know the answer, Jeff, maybe you know. How do these definitions relate to the use tables? We have use tables, right, that define classifications of businesses. I'm trying to remember, I didn't think about this ahead of time, but I'm trying to remember if there is actually a designation like this in the use tables or not.
There are designations for restaurant and retail, but personal services isn't called out specifically. I think there is maybe a general services line. I can't remember. I'm actually asking in context to banks, right? Because in theory, it should have a label as to what its designation is, and that should help provide clarity here. But I think in answering this question, and we don't have to have the answer now, but it may warrant us looking at the use tables and helping us define, if we get into a conversation later, maybe next week, that maybe we want to just have those as a reference, even if we just send out a link to everybody.
Just quickly, so in the actual use table, which is in the subsection above the one that we're discussing here this evening, it's a generic line item called service. So it's not as specific as personal service. It just says service. So the service category is permitted across all the town center subzones.
Okay. Yeah, it'll just be interesting to compare those two, because it might be something to consider in the future.
Great.
How to define the use tables better in this context.
Okay, any other questions about this? I just have one more slide. Okay. So the last piece, just clarifying the next steps. And again, this was included in your agenda packet for tonight. So we have the public hearing scheduled on November 3rd, and Chair Hubble and Interim Director Thomas both mentioned at the top of this discussion that we're not looking for any decisions tonight. This is a continued discussion, and then after the public hearing on November 3rd is when you all will deliberate a recommendation. We're scheduled to deliver the recommendation to City Council on November 16th. And currently, as outlined in the staff memo for tonight, we're thinking there are 4 potential recommendations that could be delivered. So they're up here on the screen. The first is to recommend approval of the proposed amendments as presented, or you could recommend approval of the proposed amendments as presented and amended by the Planning Commission, recommend denial of the proposed amendments, or recommend no action on the proposed amendments and remand back to staff for further work as specified. So I'm going to leave it at that with the presentation and stop sharing. If there are any questions in particular about this information, which is essentially the amendment information that was included in your packet, we're happy to take those questions now.
It looks like we have a question from Victor.
Yeah, Sarah, I think it was on slide 2, and you don't have to put it back up. It's also in the agenda packet. There's the pink line map on page number 4. Mm-hmm. And then on the page before that is number 3. It shows a different proposed line. Can you remind me why those 2 lines are different? One shows the line all the way down 77th, and one shows it stopping at Southeast 29th.
Yeah, let me pull it up really quickly on my end.
The maybe I can, while Sarah's pulling that up, I'll try and get ahead of it here. The one was the existing that's in the code currently, Commissioner, and then the other represents the proposed.
No, the existing is actually on page 2.
Yep, I see what you're looking at, Victor. So the proposed addition of running down 77th Avenue from 29th to all the way to Mercerdale Park. I actually think that may have been an oversight when we were updating the maps. We did make some formatting changes to prepare the maps to insert them into the code. So that actually was just an oversight. There should be a pink line on that stretch of 77th. And I believe that was an addition following conversation with City Council. So I will make sure that we update that and update the folder, the public folder that includes all the information for the public hearing.
Got it. Thank you.
The east side of 77th, south of 29th.
Mm-hmm.
No, correct.
Okay, I see that now in the packet. Yeah, there should be a line there.
Yeah, the candy cane line was there, and then it disappeared. Carolyn, you have a question?
A couple of questions. For figure 3 in the draft ordinance, there's 2 versions. One has an orange line in the middle of it. One has an orange line at the bottom of it. I don't understand what the 2 orange line.
So what happened there was the reason why those maps now appear twice. We had posted an initial draft that corresponded with the timing of the public hearing notice back in early October. But then if you look carefully at the maps that have the line kind of going horizontal through the middle, those have been updated now with the new map that follows each one that has the horizontal line going through the middle. And no substantive changes have occurred. The maps just got cleaned up by our mapping folks at City Hall to be more in a version that would be part of a potential adopting ordinance and actually go into the code itself.
Let me take a guess. The orange line in the middle is the delete sign.
Yes, sorry.
It was.
And the one below is an addition. Yeah.
Okay, and then my next question is, in the original code or the existing code, there's parking requirements or different requirements based on parking, but I noticed in the draft, I don't think there's any discussion of parking. Why is that completely just deleted and,
Yeah, the two issues between the retail frontage use and the FAR and then the parking have been proposed to be separated a little bit. The reason why is for what we're doing currently to focus on the adjacent retail street uses in the FAR. And then we are in the process of, the city council actually is in the process of selecting a consultant to do an updated town center parking study. And part of that scope of work is to complete an analysis of on and off site town center parking and come up with some recommendations related to parking standards and requirements for the town center.
okay, thank you.
So, yeah, thank you.
Comes later. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions, Carolyn?
No, thank you.
Any other questions? Sarah, were you going to go through the matrix? Is that the next?
Yes, I will pull that up right now. And again, if it looks funky when you see it, please let me know. My computer has a mind of its own. Okay, can you see an Excel spreadsheet?
It looks funky, or it did look funky. I think now it's better.
Okay. Is it legible by most cases? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So again, we sent this out earlier, and this is based on questions that we received during the September 22nd Planning Commission meeting, as well as a couple of questions that I believe were emailed after. I think Jeff and I worked on addressing these questions in partnership, so we will probably go back and forth on some of these, explaining the information, but I will tackle the first one. And this question was related to the pro forma model that Community Attributes Inc. created. And the question was around the NAICS codes that are used to project future demand. Does the model take into account online sales tax revenue versus brick and mortar or geographical differences, so like town center versus South End businesses? So to provide more context about that, the model that CAI developed to estimate supportable retail growth was revised following the April 20th City Council presentation. So the revised estimate, which is the one that has informed all of the work going forward, uses only the taxable retail receipts from the NAICS codes 44 and 45, which are retail trade, 71 and 72, which 71 is arts, entertainment, and recreation, and then 72 is accommodation and food services. This was through conversation with City Council, and there was kind of questions about the supportable retail growth number being too high. So we worked with CAI to identify a subset of NAICS sectors that would better represent the commercial uses that we're looking to enhance or support. On the topic of, are we able to account for online sales tax revenue versus brick and mortar or geographical differences? I talked with our finance department, and I believe this question may have come up last year as well. So we receive all of our sales tax or all of our tax revenue data from the Department of Revenue. And the sales tax data that we receive is based on NAICS codes. So similar NAICS codes, we're able to sort it that way. But they aren't able to, or at least they don't provide the level of detail needed to distinguish between a brick and mortar and an online sales. So, currently with the data as we receive it, we are not able to determine, what portion of the retail sales tax is coming from Amazon, for instance, versus Walgreens in town center or other brick and mortar locations. Those NAICS codes, though, one kind of caveat that the finance department wanted to raise with us is that the NAICS codes that could include online sales, so you would think of something like NAICS 44 and 45, which are those retail trade codes, they are the fastest growing categories in terms of overall dollar growth compared to the 2020 numbers. So you may be able to surmise that online sales had a lot to do with that growth. But as it stands right now, we aren't set up to be able to analyze at that level. And then finally, the supportable retail growth reflects the island-wide conditions. So it wasn't segmented by geography. You can maybe reasonably assume, though, that any major retail growth would take place in town center because it's designated as the island's retail core. But the geographic differences, that is something to consider that we need to keep in mind going forward potentially. I see a couple of hands. I can stop here if there's questions.
Carolyn, is your hand from before? And then I think Ted's cat has a question.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that the NAICS 44-45 codes contain online data, and that the data that we're receiving from the Department of Revenue does not differentiate between what is an online sale and what is a brick and mortar sale. And we are unable to make that differentiation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and so even though we know that we have data that does not accurately reflect brick and mortar sales in town center, we're pushing forward with making legislation based on that data. Is that correct?
We are using the data that we have at our disposal, as well, the industry standard data that we have, but I see that Jeff put his mic on, so maybe he has a more eloquent response to that.
The data originally used by our consultant that was working with us at the time earlier this year was significantly more, the data did get thinned out to be more narrow focused on the categories of spending that are present on Mercer Island, if that makes sense, the types of businesses. But it's not a great, it's not a, I mean, there's no way around it. The ability to super refine the data is low. So that was discussed at council back in April. And at council's request, our consultant went back and did that. The layer of refinement they were able to do, which lowered spending significantly per capita on Mercer Island. But then and this is going off subject here a little bit, but when the spending data refinement was done, it lowered spending significantly per capita, but combined with updating the population projections as the process through the Growth Management Planning Council with King County was coming to a preliminary conclusion at roughly the same time this was occurring. Those estimates were updated. So the net effect was that those two variables largely offset each other when the consultant reran the numbers, if that makes sense.
So I guess I have a question for the chair then. We're not deliberating tonight, and so I want to make sure that I don't stray into that territory. But I have serious concerns based on the fact that we are acknowledging that we're using the wrong data, or that we don't know how much of this is Amazon data. And I guess we shouldn't be getting into that tonight, but if there's anything that we can do to try and work with the DOR to get more detailed data on this, to try and make sure we're doing the math right between now and when we do the public hearing, I would greatly appreciate that.
Very good. I think that's been heard. I know council certainly deliberated that very point quite a bit. I see Victor also has, oh, sorry, Ted, did you have anything else before I go to Victor?
That's all I had on this row. Thanks.
Great. Victor.
So kind of a response to Ted's question and something to consider. While there is online data that's mixed in here that admittedly pollutes the information here, what was not considered in the CAIS data is, and Jeff, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. They also didn't consider the impact of being sandwiched between two very large cities in Washington state that will probably be growing at a much faster rate than the Mercer Island retail businesses. So the way I see it, yeah, there's a bunch of online data that's mixed in there, but we're also not considering the impact of the surrounding cities as well. So I view it as a wash.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on number 1 before Sarah moves on to the next item? Okay, Sarah.
Okay, so number 2 relates to, again, the terminology that we're using, and this information that was included in the matrix and that's on the screen right now for row 2 is essentially the same information in slide 6 of the presentation. So what do we mean by commercial? Does this imply only retail and restaurant or other commercial uses such as commercial office space? We need to clarify the terminology. So again, to date, we've been using the word commercial or commercial uses to refer to 3 categories: restaurant, retail, or personal services uses. That is currently how the code defines the retail street frontage requirement, or the uses that are subject to or eligible uses for the retail street frontage requirement, excuse me. So we started there. We also know in conversation with council that in particular restaurants and more kind of traditional vibrant retail are the types of business categories that they are hoping to encourage through a commercial FAR requirement or something else, should it come to that. So, again, just to reiterate, maybe the most gray area may be with personal services. So we could explore amending this definition or category, or we could also explore potentially other options for clarifying the eligible uses within the code.
Commissioner Murphy.
Yeah, I apologize. I meant to raise this in the first one, if we could go back for a moment. I would like Jeff to not necessarily comment tonight, but maybe when he comes back on these issues on number 1, to try and explain how you go from increased sales, regardless of what's included and what should be stripped out, to translating that into square footage of brick and mortar in the town center or in any other part. I watched both council meetings, read through all the materials, read through all the CAI reports, and never saw anything that explained how you can translate those numbers into square footage of retail in any logical fashion. So if that could be explained further, that would be helpful.
So Commissioner, I unfortunately lost my audio there in a few fragments during your question. So can I follow up with you directly to make sure I've got your question accurately, and then we'll log that in and follow up then.
Yeah, and that comment or a variation on that comment is reflected in my memo, which raises another procedural question: is will my memo be included in the packet for the next session?
We'd be happy to include it in the packet.
Great, thank you.
Was that all, Mike? Carolyn?
If we do discuss expanding what comes under the umbrella of personal services, is there, Sarah, some way we can look for the universe of types of activities that or businesses that we might want to consider? I would hate to just try to pick things out of a hat, or, kind of a discussion amongst ourselves. Is there some reference or resource we can use to make sure we're hitting all of the appropriate types of businesses?
I think there is. We purposely did not propose any amendments for this because we just wanted to, one, ground it in the definitions that are already included in the code and then expand from there. So I do think that we wouldn't need to start from scratch to expand on that definition and make sure it's applicable to the types of businesses that you want to foster in the town center.
Did you say that? I wasn't sure. Did you say we would need to start from scratch, or we would not?
We would not. We would not. Yes.
Okay.
And Carolyn, that I just wanted to add, that went to my question earlier about the use tables, because we actually have a definition of every type of business that's allowed. So rather than looking at just broadly trying to figure out every willy-nilly business, we actually already have a table of businesses that are allowed, and we can use that as a framework for categorizing which ones fall into each of these categories.
Where is that list of businesses, Dan?
I believe Sarah said it was in the section, 2.19.15, I think you said.
So it's in the city code?
It's in the city code. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Great.
So let's see. Do I find that then in the draft code as a reference where I can go and look that up, I suppose?
It's actually in the section right before the retail street frontage section begins. So
Okay, very good.
it is included in 1911.
Thank you. I will look that up.
You see any other hands, Chair?
I don't see any other hands if we want to move to number 3.
Okay. So number 3, this is Jeff's number, so I will let him take it away.
And number 3 was the question that came up at the September meeting regarding a parcel by parcel FAR. And so we did take a look. Unfortunately, the city doesn't have access to the CoStar data. So to look at this, to take an overview look at this, we used King County assessed data only. But we did go through the 28 parcels that are on figure 3, proposed figure 3, the map where the parcels are highlighted in blue color, and found results that I believe are similar to those results suggested by perhaps 2 of the planning commissioners. Upon redevelopment, there'd be parcels that would experience a net increase in total commercial space, while other parcels would experience a net decrease. From the calculations that we looked at, the Walgreens parcel appeared to have the largest net decrease. Overall, between all the 28 parcels on that figure 3 map, the sum produced was a net increase and was generally consistent with the number that was produced using the CoStar data by community attributes.
I see Victor has a question.
So just following up on the question that Mr. Goldbach had during the public comments, are we going to publish that analysis and put it in the next packet?
Sure, we're happy to provide the numbers. I wouldn't call it an analysis. I would call it a look at each of those parcels on that map. But yeah, we're happy to provide that to you. All the data is from the King County Assessors database, available publicly.
Regardless of what you want to call it, I still think it's interesting in terms of kind of where we gain and where we lose.
Sure.
Okay. Ted, I saw you came off of mute. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to just kind of add on to that to clarify that because there are gains or potential gains and potential losses, that we enable properties to develop with less retail or require more, doesn't necessarily mean that action will happen. But as we were discussing, I think in last month's session, the economic self-interest of the landowner, we should expect they would pursue their own self-interest, such that if it's more in their interest to have less retail there, that they would do so. So I think where we allow there to be less retail on a site, we can expect that site to be more incentivized to redevelop. And I think that's one of the inequities we're trying to avoid here. We don't want to create winners and losers necessarily. But that's, I think, why we're trying to look at this analysis in the first place, right?
Well, I don't know if you were looking for a response to that, but I'm happy to provide a comment at least. The intent of the exercise with the FAR, the way it's been presented, was to provide an equal requirement out to the identified parcels. And in this case, there's 28 of them that are on that figure 3 map. There's certainly been some comments and suggestions, not just from the Planning Commission, but others along the way too, that there's different ways of doing that. Again, keeping an equal standard requirement for the parcels that are going to be subject to it was part of the council deliberations as they were trying to figure out, what option or what combination of options they wanted to see put into actual code, proposed code amendments for a legislative review.
Jeff, if I could just add one more question to number 3, and it's related but similar, and I didn't see it in the rest of the question, so I'll bring it up here, which is in the calculation, or there's a third map, right, that shows what are we calling it, the post 2005 redevelopment properties, and it was this no net loss provision. And I had asked the question last time in understanding why add the complexity of that versus just adding these FAR requirements to all of those properties, notwithstanding the fact that they're not likely to redevelop anytime soon. But the no net loss provision, in my understanding, was designed to say, hey, if there was a fire in one of those buildings, heaven forbid, burnt down, and everyone were safe, and it were to be redeveloped, they couldn't develop it with any less retail than was already there. To which I asked, what would the minimum requirement be if we applied the FAR? And I think you were going to look at, or you had said that there had been analysis done and that you thought that the FAR would actually require more retail than the current existing retail in those areas. And so I don't know if you have the data or not, but it would be great, in addition to the 28 parcels, to also include an understanding or a comparison of the no net lot, like the existing retail that would fall under no net loss, and how much would be required if the FAR were applied. And I'm asking this question all in the light of, why are we complicating it by having this no net loss if the FAR actually achieves or maybe even does better than what the no net loss does? And it would just be simpler to administer.
Yeah.
So
I can comment on that in a couple of different ways. So you're right. I believe community attributes using the CoStar data had actually done an FAR calculation for those post 2005 parcels. And if I'm recalling, Sarah, help me out here, I'm recalling the number, I believe the cumulative number for those was 0.11, if I'm not mistaken. So It was significantly lower than the proposed 0.2623. Now, Chair, to answer the other part of your question, so the calculation, right? The post 2005 development parcels are already built and they're already functioning with their commercial space as is. That commercial space went into the overall need that was calculated by community attributes, along then with the existing commercial space throughout the rest of the town center. So it was contributing at its current level into that whole number. And then for the 28 parcels in the FAR that are on that blue map, to figure out then, okay, well, that commercial space is already there. It's recently built. So the delta between the whole and the post 2005 parcels is what has been, is how we arrived at 0.2623 for then the 28 parcels identified in the proposal that would be subject to that requirement. So the idea is if those parcels were simply just redeveloped at 0.2623, in theory, right, you'd be overbuilding the supply for what the analysis said could be supported. So that's how we ended up with this no net loss on those post 2005 parcels. But I do understand your point, what you're saying as well.
Yeah, I mean, I won't get into the deliberation of that. I understand the calculation for the 28 parcels and why you would do it that way. From a land use planning perspective, it's just not clean at all. And it's not as someone I'm sure who, comes from a planning background, you understand my frustration with what I would consider just bad land use planning, because we're actually not planning the land use in a consistent way. It's done to it's being done to address a different concern. So I think both can exist, but if we can get that data, if there's any granularity to that data, I think getting back to the main question, if there's any granularity in that data from those parcels, I think it would just be interesting to see.
Sure thing.
Mike, and then Tiffin.
Jeff, following up on a question that was in an email, have you or Sarah been able to discern whether any other municipality uses this FAR approach to either preserve or define the amount of retail required in a given area, zone area or sub area?
Yep. I don't recall seeing that in an email. I apologize if I missed it. I believe this may have come up though at our last meeting. And the comment that was provided by staff at your last meeting on that was this is somewhat pioneering in nature. We've looked at a lot of other cities that have some nicely written policies towards wanting to achieve the preservation of the amount of commercial space, existing commercial space. It comes in a few different forms and fashions, the language, but there hasn't been a lot of implementation of that type of desire that's being expressed in those policies to actually do that. So our consultant community attributes, it's worked fairly broadly up and down the West Coast and into the Intermountain West. Didn't have a solid example either of something that they've come across with this type of provision being instituted into a code requirement.
Tiffin.
Here, let me lower my hand. Thanks. So I actually want to stop talking about numbers for just a minute and take this a little bit higher level and just say, what are we actually trying to achieve? I mean, I think it's a lot of what we were trying to achieve in 2016, but obviously the regulations didn't quite get there. And I've been trying to think about it and summarize it. And I think what it really is we want a strong pedestrian retail core on 27th and 78th, and then some offshoots around there. So it's like if you take those two corridors and if you think, what do we want to do to get that kind of pedestrian feel? And you think about other cities that have done this. Other cities don't have, 5, 6, 7 pedestrian retail corridors. It like doesn't work. What they usually have is like 1 or 2 really solid retail corridors where you have the concentration of the restaurants and the retail. So what I'm going to suggest high level is that we kind of try to focus where restaurants and retail are going to be on probably those 2 corridors. It probably makes sense, but I'm open. And then all those other services that we definitely need. I mean, the banks, the real estate agents, all those things, we need them. They can still be in the town center, but maybe not on the periphery of our retail core. So that's my suggestion. And then the second thing I was going to say is I actually can't understand how we can do this without really having a solid understanding of what our parking strategy is going to be. If it comes later, that's fine. But to me, the parking strategy is completely central to making this all work. Because if you think about any city that has a good pedestrian core, they have parking that's easy to get to. It's accessible, but it's not that far from where people are going to go and walk. So I don't quite understand how that's going to work. And we already have a difficult situation with parking in the sense that it's all kind of privatized and we don't have a good public surplus of parking. And then the last thing I was going to say is I just wanted to comment on the memo Mike sent specifically regarding some sort of quantifiable way to incentivize public space, like a public plaza, an open space, something. I know there's been talk about wanting to do that. And I think we should really think about what we're willing to trade off to get that, in a positive way. So like, is there an area where we would say, okay, maybe you don't need this much retail on this parcel if you provide open space? Okay, I'm done talking.
Thank you, Tiffin. Any other comments or questions about number 3? Okay, Sarah.
Okay. So moving on to this question number 4, this came up in the last meeting. For the current code requirements, what's the minimum of retail space required in the town center zone? I will preface this response with we have not done any specific analysis or calculation on a parcel by parcel basis with the current code. As you can see, I've copied it here in the staff response column. It's not necessarily numerically based. It's tied to public parking and percentages. But if this is something that Planning Commission is interested in us, pursuing a little more in depth to have some comparisons with what currently exists versus, applying commercial FAR to all the parcels versus kind of the projected, we're happy to do that. But it sounds like based on this conversation, really the parcel by parcel basis, you're more concerned with what it might look like on maybe all of the post 2005 development properties, applying it there and doing some comparison, as well as providing the numbers that we've come up with the FAR net gain versus net loss on the 28 parcels in the blue map. Any comments or questions about that?
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, Mike got a late hand in.
Gotcha.
A late hand. Just one question on the last thing about the minimum depth of frontage retail of 16 feet. Has that, that arises from the old code. Has there been any look at that? That seems pretty thin. Has Jeff, have you or Sarah or has anybody or CAI, did they investigate whether that's still a meaningful or useful measure for retail?
It hasn't been looked at specifically as part of the exiting of the moratorium strategy. So that would be certainly something that I think is worthy to look at some point in time. I do, Sarah, maybe you can help me out here. I do recall CAI mentioning during one of our conversations that typically it's pretty low for a minimum standard. But I don't, Commissioner, we didn't have extensive conversation around the 16 feet.
Carolyn?
Yeah, this question is, not so closely related to what's on the screen right now, but it probably fits as well as anything. I still don't get why it is that the draft proposes for those properties that were developed more recently, I guess, post 2005, if they were to do a massive remodel, which is equal to 50% of the current total assessed value, why they wouldn't be required to come up to the same retail requirement that we have for the other properties, unless I'm misunderstanding it.
I think that goes.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say, I think that ties back to Chair Hubble's comments as well in relation to, commercial FAR being applied to all of those properties versus including a no net loss provision. So I think it's something we can take a look at. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to elaborate.
No, I was going to say essentially the same thing. It goes back to the chair's question from a few minutes ago.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll keep this moving. The next few questions are fairly brief, so hopefully we can get through this. The comp plan, there was a question about the comprehensive plan and whether it includes applicable policies or references that need to be updated. Jeff reviewed the comp plan and didn't find any specific goals or policies. However, he did find that figure 2 is duplicated in the comp plan. And so that's something that we will need to remove regardless of what happens with these code amendments. As a reminder, we are undertaking or beginning our effort to start the periodic update of the comp plan next year, and that needs to be completed by 2024. So that at least the removal of figure 2 from the comp plan will be something that is addressed through that periodic update.
I still have a question on that, Dan.
Yeah.
I was the one that submitted that question.
Go ahead.
No, it sounded like when I was reading your answer here, it sounds like you're going to remove something from the comp plan that doesn't fit the regulations we're drafting. I didn't think that was legal. I didn't think you could do it that way. I thought you had to have comp plan that agrees with the regulations you subsequently develop.
Yeah, Commissioner, I don't disagree with your statement at all. One of the challenges we're having here is we're about to get this periodic update underway. So typically what, I don't know about typically, but a strategy that cities will use will be amendments that need to be made to the comp plan, rather than trying to process standalone amendments and do a periodic update all at the same time. Standalone amendments will get folded into the periodic update. So then it becomes one grand singular action at the end of the day when the new comp plan is actually adopted legislatively by the city council.
Would you have to hold off on adopting your regulations until that had been done? Or that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, the problem I'm seeing with what's in the current comp plan now is that there's this map, this figure 2 is actually a development regulation that somehow made it into the comp plan. Mm-hmm. It may well have seemed like a grand idea at the time when that decision was made, which is fine. But upon further review of it, and this exercise has precipitated that review, we really do need to not have development regulations in a policy document, just like we try to avoid having policy statements in the development regulations. So In the event that there is an update to that figure 2 that is made, that will stand as the governing, the updated version will stand as the governing map that is actually in the development code itself and would need to be adhered to for any development proposals that are subject to it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, sir, if you want to go to the next one.
Sure. The next question, I also think this may have come from you, Commissioner Boatson. Did staff consider a variable FAR? Jeff, do you want to elaborate on this one as well?
Yeah, and I think we've covered this a little bit in a few of the previous answers. Just back to Chair Hubble's question and then Commissioner Boatsman a little later. No, the short answer is no. The slightly longer answer is, again, for a uniform FAR, which is how the methodology was built, that's what's proposed to be applied to the parcels that are identified on that map with the parcels shaded in blue. And we spoke about that previously there with a few of the other questions that have come up.
Okay, and then I think the last two questions were just clarifying questions that came in. Do the pink lines only identify which properties have to have retail, or do they also identify on which side of the property the retail needs to be? Yes, the pink lines do identify that retail space must be provided along those street frontages that are indicated by the pink lines. I think the next question connects to that as well. Is it correct that in addition to adding retail space, one goal of the proposed changes will be to concentrate retail in certain areas for the benefits related to consumer enthusiasm for patronizing clustered retail businesses? And so again, the original intent of including the pink lines map in the 2016 update was to concentrate retail within a portion of town center. So the proposed changes are, while we're removing some areas, some street frontages from some parcels, the changes in general will substantially expand the amount of retail required. But there are still areas where it's more concentrated than others. So for instance, in 27th and 78th, those two corridors still have a strong concentration, and what some might say even more so since we've extended the pink lines all the way down 78th.
Dan, a couple of follow-up questions on these two.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, Karen.
Okay, thank you. I had asked 07 and 08 were a couple of questions I had submitted. So following up on 007, so I was looking at the map and I see, for example, parcels that have street frontages on 3 sides or 2 sides. Are they required to have retail on every side that faces street frontage? Or is this based on just, are they limited to a, is it just one side?
It would be any side of the parcel that has the pink line adjacent to it.
Okay. Okay, then regarding question 8, on that one, I was thinking about 77th, south of 29th, extending down to Mercerdale Park. There isn't all of the other pink line areas. There's pink line on both sides of the road. That's the only one where the pink line is solo on one side of the street. And every parcel on 77th Avenue, south of Southeast 29th, has frontage on other sides, other streets. So it seems to me that that extension gets away from the desire to cluster businesses, kind of expands the total area, but dilutes it in a way. And the only thing you get from it in terms of a parcel that would only have frontage on 77th is that one small lot there. So I wasn't sure that the gain of additional retail was worth the spreading out. And possibly, if I think I understand that Farmers there's some residential development proposed there, or?
Yep. So Commissioner, a very astute observation. And this exact segment that you are referencing here in your question now is one that was discussed at length with the City Council.
Yeah.
This segment is 77th.
Yep.
And and it ended up making it onto the map when council was taking a look at this. So I think the comments you make are good comments. And if we get to the point here on November 3rd of having deliberations, that's your comments are worthy of conversation with the Planning Commission.
I want to see if I could understand that a little bit better. Thank you.
Carolyn, are you done?
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Victor?
So, Jeff, I believe that the Zigma project is the only project that was developed under the 26 or is planned to be developed under the 2016 regulations. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, correct.
And so, in spite of the goal and aspiration to concentrate retail, we're actually losing about 6,000 square feet of retail on that, right?
I don't have the exact number in front of me at the moment, but I think you're
about 19,000 to 13,000, right?
That would be a net negative. That's correct.
Yeah. So I would just say that, in spite of a very aspirational goal to concentrate retail, this idea of concentrating retail isn't really working out for us, is it?
There, my friend, I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Thanks.
Tiffin.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that. I mean, I think there's a general realization that the 2016 regulations didn't work out for retail the way we were hoping. And I think a lot of that is because it was really focused more on the aesthetic and the architectural standards. So, I mean, I'm not making excuses for it, but what I would say is this is our opportunity to change it. And it doesn't mean that the idea of having some concentration in whatever way makes sense is a bad idea. It just means we need the right regulations in place to do it.
Okay. Any other, I know we've come to the end of your list, Sarah. Any other general comments or questions from the group about the, my screen keeps going like into full screen mode. It's crazy. There we go. Any other just general questions from anybody? Victor?
Not really questions, but two comments. One is, it's kind of a question, I need confirmation on this, but I believe in looking at the map, in order for this to work, 2 of the 3 gas stations in the town center need to be redeveloped to something else. Is that correct? And then the third one, I believe, was also penciled out of the town center and is not in a retail location. Is that right? And the follow-up question to that is, what do we expect Islanders to do about gas?
I think one opportunity might be, not to get into the deliberation, but certainly adding gas stations to a permitted use under the definitions as a retail use could be a way to solve that problem.
Understood, but I think it's a little bit different. It's, in order for the math to work, it has to it actually has to be redeveloped to a square footage that's larger than really what a gas station would take up.
Hmm.
And so
Understood.
I would just ask that staff consider that as a consideration, because otherwise you take those 2 gas stations out and suddenly the math doesn't work on this anymore.
Yeah, a couple comments on that. The first one is, and I think the chair just mentioned it actually. So gas stations, through our lens, are a retail type use. So that'd be number one. Number two, if to your point, Commissioner, the 2 parcels in the town center that are subject to the FAR requirement that have gas stations on them, the blue map is one of the proposed code amendments that are up for deliberation by the Planning Commission. So the commission has the ability to recommend taking parcels on and off of that map, or either of the other 2 maps, figure 2, 3, or 4, that are in your packet. So
the follow-up to that is, in that scenario, if that were to happen, does the FAR ratio, the 0.26, does that have to change upwards in order to make up the space for those 2 parcels?
if you wanted to maintain a 0.2623, or excuse me, not if you wanted to maintain a 0.2623, if you wanted to maintain the whole, the sum of the existing and the future that was identified, then yes, the FAR would need to move, depending on what you do with the maps, the FAR would need to move one way or the other to keep the whole intact.
Right. So that 2.6 becomes, I don't know, 2.67 or 2.7, something like that. I don't know. Okay.
Correct.
Well, also I'll go to Ted.
Yes, I had kind of a similar thought, but on the flip side, which is that the 2 large grocery stores that we have on the island, I believe, have a current FAR that's significantly above 0.26. And I'm wondering if that means that if those properties were to redevelop and they went down to 0.26, would we end up with smaller grocery stores? And would that, suddenly losing all our gas stations, would we suddenly have less capacity to supply food to the island, or would we end up with 4 or 5 smaller grocery stores instead of 2 large ones? I wonder whether the developers of those properties might choose to just have a larger FAR so that the entire ground floor of their structure could be a grocery store that is taking up significantly more than 0.26. But hopefully the 0.26, if we're trying to apply it to the entire town center, doesn't get interpreted by developers as we got to hit this exactly, but rather that the development can still be based on what is best for the community. I'm not sure that's necessarily a question. It's kind of more of an observation of what might happen to our grocery stores if we apply this 0.26 everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I will let's see, Victor, I think you have was that from before, or did you raise your hand again?
No, it's a new question based on Ted's comment.
Go ahead.
Just a point of clarification for Jeff. The FAR doesn't apply to all properties, it's select properties, correct? And they're the properties in blue on the map.
Figure 3, correct.
Right.
And it's a minimum, right? There's nothing to say that if market forces dictate a larger grocery store, that they're still at their liberty to do so.
Right, and both of the grocery stores are blue on that map, so they both would be subject to the FAR. Not all the properties are blue, but those two happen to be.
Carolyn.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if that grocery store were to develop today, before this regulation is adopted, they'd even have to provide even less retail space. I mean, if market forces were such they wanted to develop now. So I think we're sort of in the same boat now, but actually in a worse situation. Am I missing something, or is it?
That's a good observation.
Oh, okay, thanks. I struggle.
I want to make sure, Mike, before I call on you, I just, Jordan, I haven't heard anything from you. I just want to make sure you don't have anything, or if you're just listening, that's fine, but I want to make sure you're included.
Thanks, Dan. I'm just listening. I mean, there are a lot of great comments that I wanted to, like, yes, I agree, but I'm just listening. Thanks.
Great. Mike.
Yeah, just to follow up on Ted's and Carolyn's comments about the FAR minimum, and generally retail has the CAI reports reveal the requirement for retail is not particularly desirable compared to the desire for residential, which is more profitable and more consistent and less expensive, frankly. So, the notion that the 0.26 is going to be a minimum and people can do more, it would be an unusual circumstance if that occurred, unless, for example, they in fact had a tenant for a large space. But I think we have to be realistic about whether that minimum is going to be a minimum. And, I just don't see developers looking at that and saying, oh, let's do, 50% retail here. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, since I kind of made that other comment, I'll just say I generally agree with you with the fact that there are some unique cases, in using grocery stores as an example, where I do think market forces will dictate something greater than the minimum. And I don't think we should minimize that. Like, I do think that there's a market force there that would drive that. What I wanted to, if I could, so Sarah and Jeff, did you have anything else in sort of the formal part of the presentation here? What I wanted to do is, Commissioner Murphy, you had sent out, I think, a memo to everybody. And one of the things that I noted was I wanted to make sure that everyone had sort of a thoughtful understanding of what you were trying to describe in your memo. And I don't want to necessarily drive too much conversation around it, but I do think it was valuable for everyone to just get maybe an overview of what your thoughts were, so that they can digest those between now and next week, and allow people to ask questions if they had them, so that at least people can be informed and prepared for next time.
Okay. I'd say the top line summary is that what I see in the proposed changes is a plan that is mathematically driven to try to equalize or preserve retail just spread out over a larger area. And in the process, as the analysis suggests, and as Victor has also pointed out, we end up driving down the percentage of retail in parcels and areas where we have concentrated retail that is very accessible, very walkable, well parking supplied. And we're looking at replacing it with retail that is in smaller pieces spread out over a larger area. And from big picture standpoint, I don't think that's what was desired in 2016, nor is that desired today. And I think this proposal has the appearance of symmetry and mathematical precision, but I don't think it accomplishes the policy that either the council or the community or the planning commission really are looking for. And so that would be my sort of top line summary of it. In addition, there are a number of other problems has been addressed in questions here relating to the inclusion of square footage for retail or for more retail driven by retail sales numbers from the state. And I just don't see that there's any correlation between those things, and there's no effort to discount the sales in other areas of the island and off island or via Amazon or whoever. And so I think that was simply appears to have been done to provide, a larger numerator, as it were, for the equation to try to drive up that figure. And while that was clearly well-intentioned to try and provide a cushion for future development, I don't think it is either mathematically or analytically sustainable. So, and as Tiffin has pointed out, and I pointed out in the memo, there's no really meaningful component here to drive additional parking, which is critical to the viability of any retail. And similarly, there's really no component in here designed to drive the creation of public amenities, and those public amenities could be parking, because that's a big factor, and that's a big complaint in the community. And I'd say one of my biggest concerns is looking at this parcel on a parcel by parcel basis, is that if this goes into effect, it creates an immediate incentive for the largest retail areas in the town center to convert under this code, to redevelop under this code, because it would drive down, in many cases, substantially the retail component that would be required of them as compared to where they're at now. So, I think in addition to the questions I asked, those are really the main takeaways. And then in terms of analysis of what's proposed. And for the rest of my memo, I proposed an alternative, which was based on what the council had looked at, and a little bit of a remixing of what the council was looking at originally. And that is more of what I call a modified no net loss provision applicable in town center. And, then additional retail in the areas on the pink line map, excluding 77th below 29th, to provide, additional areas for development. But I think that it is the answer to preserving is some type of modified no net loss, rather than trying to achieve mathematical certainty by spreading out the existing retail over a larger area. Because I think that could well be a fool's errand, not achievable in any of our lifetimes or ever. And that's, I think, the sort of the short summary of what I wrote to the commissioners.
Great. So if I could just summarize what I heard in your proposal, was a modified no net loss provision and a change to the pink lines map, removing the eastern section of 77th south of 29th. I saw you're nodding your head.
Yes, and there's a few other details that I think should be looked at, and that is, to look at issues like minimum depth of retail, look at possibility of transferability of commercial square footage among parcels, sort of like transfer of development rights. Consider allowing additional stories for significant public amenities such as street level parking or public open space, things of that nature to incentivize what we would like to create, rather than trying to make what I consider to be a somewhat illusory mathematical formula that is not going in any reasonable time frame be achieved, especially if we're incentivizing the existing retail parcels, heavy retail parcels, to redevelop at a much lower retail density. The other comment I would make that's in my memo is that, I believe the council, reading between the lines and, doing my due diligence and talking to different people, I think the council was concerned that any element of no net loss could present a somewhat higher risk of a legal challenge, because I think the term that Jeff has used maybe in his presentation and elsewhere, and I think the council used, was it appears inequitable to certain parcels. And I think that this is something that may require more in-depth discussion when we get to that point. But the issue of this being a legal risk, I think, is extremely low based on my knowledge and understanding, which is, I won't go into all that, but is fairly extensive, and we can discuss that later. But that's summarized in the memo. And it would be helpful to hear from the city's outside land use council on that issue, possibly next time.
Okay. Carolyn, I saw you have your hand up patiently. Thank you.
Yeah, let's see, now what was I going to ask? Oh, okay. Thinking about the viability of development for a parcel that has 2 or 3 sides facing pink lines. Is that a disincentive to develop? I don't know enough about the real estate market to know, but I'm just curious about that. What do people that know a lot more than I do about it say about that?
Is that question directed to me?
That question is directed to Jeff.
Okay.
Sarah. So yeah, I'm sorry I diverged from your presentation, Mike. I probably had a question waiting in the wings for you. Then I decided not to ask it. So I can delay on that discussion if you like, Dan.
No, that's fine. I do think it's somewhat germane. So, Jeff, did you fully understand the question that she put forth?
I think, yeah, I think so. And I'm not. I'm certainly not an expert to have a final word on that type of question, but I would offer as an observation, just on Mercer Island alone, you see parcels that have developed with multiple, multiple frontages adjacent to public streets that have And there's no reason, whether there's a pink line on the map or not, there's no reason to think that it couldn't happen again in the future. So,
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Victor?
So just reacting to what Mike said, and I've heard both Mike, it appears that Mike is arguing for potentially more time, and I heard Tiffin argue the same thing with regard to parking, and we need parking included in this. And I hear what Mike is saying as well. I guess my question for Jeff is, what is our timeline on this? I know that Sarah laid out a very aggressive timeline that culminates with I think a public hearing on November 3rd, and then this goes back to the council. But is it possible to get more time on this, or is that timeline that's been laid out the timeline that we're stuck with?
yeah, Sarah, can you are you able to bring up that last slide? Just, it might be handy just to have on the screen. Commissioner, to answer your question directly, the city council, as part of their direction to staff in September, my understanding of their direction was that they wanted to reconvene on this matter prior to the end of 2021. So I think what Sarah's laid out for you here, both here and then also in the packet that you received for this meeting, is that we'd like to get a recommendation. And again, Sarah provided, 4 different alternatives for the commission to consider. We'd like to get a recommendation from the commission on the code amendments that are before you to present to city council. Option 4, I think it speaks to Commissioner Murphy and, an alternative approach, or Commissioner Goodman with some additional subject matter details being considered in, where the recommendation would be to not act on the proposed amendments, and a planning commission recommendation would be to remand the matter back to staff and for further work as specified. So again, the short answer to your question is the proposed amendments, we would like to get a planning commission recommendation on those and be able to present those to city council in November. And then see, where city council wants to go from there with it in terms of broadening or narrowing the scope, whatever it may be, or changing the scope, or doing something else, depending on whatever the planning commission decides to recommend.
So, and if I'm understanding correctly, the we need more time option is option 4? Or the we need more, or is it the we need more time option is not an option, or is it not, or the we need more time option is not listed on this slide?
I think that we need more time option is the closest thing to that is option 4. The trying to land the plane on the current proposal one way or the other, I believe is something the city council was desiring to do here in 2021. Hence the recommendation on the proposed code amendments, whatever that recommendation from the commission may be.
Understood. And so that's the desire of the council. I'm wondering if there is an immovable object that says we can't extend the moratorium past this date. I think you've got to renew the moratorium, in December or somewhere around there.
Yeah, that is correct. That is a correct statement. The moratorium does need to be renewed regardless of the outcome of this planning commission recommendation and any city council action this year, because the moratorium expires on December 2nd.
Right.
And the soonest the council would be able to act legislatively on anything related to this would be December 7th. So at a minimum, there's a 5-day plus a publishing gap from the city clerk's office that would need to be covered.
That's all very good. And I see there's two hands. Let me just ask one procedural question to the effect of what's been asked, which is once we hold our public hearing, which is legislatively required for land use issues, whether we issue a recommendation or not, can the city at that point in time take liberty to take action? Like, can they take action once the public hearing has happened, irregardless of a recommendation from us, or is the recommendation itself procedurally required?
Where's a lawyer when you need one?
I know I'm getting deep into law here.
Yeah. So, Chair, my understanding is that the process, the way it's set up in code, is that the Planning Commission recommendation is a required step in the process. So, public hearing, Planning Commission recommendation, and then City Council consideration. However, to be extra sure, I will consult with our city attorney's office tomorrow on that to be doubly sure that I am providing you correct information, but that is my reading of the code.
I mean, that would have been my expectation as well, but again, I'm not putting it past the expedience of this, thinking that there's an outside chance that someone would try to push the boundaries of that interpretation. Carolyn and then Tiffin.
In considering whether, it's likely that we can finish making a recommendation on this, I feel some sense of optimism that we can, but the one thing hanging out there, I think, is why does the council think that decoupling the parking question from this project we have is feasible? I mean, they might well have a very good explanation for that, but I would sort of like to know what their thinking is, if possible.
Yeah, can I actually ask you a question, Commissioner, that might help?
Oh, sure.
Might help drive that forward a little bit. Are you speaking specifically to the draft code that has some removing in that subsection, or are you just speaking in general, like the fact that there's not more, there hasn't been more dialogue about parking to this point in time from the City Council?
What I'm referring to is what Tiffin brought up. How do you incentivize parking without weaving it into this process? But if they plan on doing something with parking requirements that doesn't have anything to do with incentivizing, in other words, they have in mind just, an ordinance that says this is how much parking you have to provide, well, then we don't need to think about it in terms of incentives. And then I don't think it's much of a hang up for us to proceed without that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of.
Understood. Thank you.
Tiffin.
Thanks. Let me just think about what you said, Carolyn. I think so where I'm coming from is I think it is a mistake to take the approach that you tell a development specifically what their parking requirement is and then just go with it, because you never get out of this trap of having sort of a private parking structure with limited ability to leave your car and say, like, go to shops in two different locations. And I think that's really counter to what we've been trying to achieve in the town center. So I'm not saying that kind of structure has no place. It possibly does. It probably does. But I'm saying I don't think it's sufficient. And so when I bring up the parking issue, I like I said, I'm very flexible about how it's done, but there might be things like a transfer of development rights. There might be things like a shared parking strategy. I think something needs to be done. And, we acknowledged this 5-6 years ago, but it really hasn't happened. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm more just saying we're now looking at the code again. Let's not lose this opportunity. So that's one thing I was going to say. The second part is I do realize they want to lift the moratorium. Is there an in-between option to give them that ability but we still kind of tackled these underlying issues. And I mean, maybe Mike, I'd even asked you if you have an opinion on how that could be done, or if you think this is as long of a process as it might appear to be.
As my memo indicates, I think not only should the moratorium be continued, but it should be expanded to cover the entire town center. Because if we are going to try and fix these things that we realize the 2016 code did not quite accomplish, then that needs to encompass more than just the southeast quadrant of the town center area. But I don't see, I'm not a big fan of moratoriums. I mean, I represent developers, so as a general rule historically. And so, I find myself in the awkward position of advocating something I've opposed most of my life. But the reality is that in order to accomplish this in a reasonable time frame, given the deadlines, there needs to be a pause and a great deal of effort put into bringing this to closure. A lot of the work has been done, and I think we're quite close, but I don't think that we're there yet, and a little more time is needed.
Okay, thank you.
So in preparation for next week, I'm trying to think about what else we can. Oh, I see, Victor, you just raised your hand. Go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up to what Mike just said. Mike, can you kind of put an estimate around how much time you think is needed?
No, because but I would not think, I think it would be measured in months. And a lot of this has to do with the ability of staff to support the effort on some of these issues and to look at alternatives for the issue of, for example, parking and incentives for public space to try to blend into this process. And that's going to take some time, and to go through the process, get that back in front of us and in front of the council. So I would think, certainly several months, but hopefully not years, like this is sort of dragged on thus far. But I think with a heavy effort, it can be accomplished.
Carolyn?
Yeah, in response to what Commissioner Murphy is saying, I guess I'm just really would like to know if staff can tell us why the council isn't including the parking question or the matter of public space, the need for public space, or some of these other important matters in this process. If I knew what their reasoning was, and I knew that there was some other way to deal with that, but in the absence of that, then we're kind of left, hanging. We don't know if something's going to be sufficient.
Yeah, just briefly. So to the public space part of the question, to my knowledge, there's been no conversation to date about this effort and exit the moratorium strategy tied to public space. And so that's just, it just hasn't occurred. That subject does not come up. In regards to parking, as we noted earlier in the evening tonight, the City Council has commissioned and budgeted for a town center parking update that the council actually is due in November, I believe, to give consideration to the awarding of a contract at some point in November. So, just from a timing perspective, the council made it very clear in helping to finalize the scope of work for that study and those funds that there was to be analysis of on and off-site town center parking, and recommendations for changes to not only operations of the city, but also the code in the town center related to parking requirements and other incentives, other categories of attributes that fall under town center parking. Assuming that a decision gets made on awarding that contract here prior to the end of 2021, we've through just the consultant evaluation process that's taken place to date, I think we've seen schedules that generally would have that effort going through most of 2021 into late, or excuse me, 2022. It would have that effort, that work going through the year. There's data collection, there's data analysis, there's public outreach components, there's some other things that go into that. So if this was to wait for that, is what I'm trying to say, I think we would be certainly late into 22, if not, further along than that, to marry all that up. Just judging by the the timing of the contract awarding and the proposed schedules that we've seen to date.
Okay. And Tiffin, earlier you made the clarification between incentivized shared parking versus parking that you just have to provide for your, your own customers or residents. So, yeah, I don't know how what the city's working on deals with the incentive part of it, because that seems to have to do with what we're talking about tonight. So, okay, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just comment that it sounds like there maybe is enough flexibility in the parking study to scope those kinds of recommendations in. Would that be an accurate statement?
My answer, I'm inclined to say yes, but Sarah also turned her mic on, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say yes. One of the things that we're really interested in is the study itself, but also the recommendations that come out of it. And all of the consultants we've interviewed so far, and within the RFP, we've referenced, the goals related to supporting town center businesses and the town center visitor experience. So a lot of that is tied to creating a more walkable corridor, like you mentioned earlier, Tiffin, and that in turn is tied to how we approach our parking code. So that'll all be scoped when we get the green light from City Council to move forward with a consultant contract.
Okay, I mean, that's like a helpful piece of information. I would say past kind of history has indicated that a lot of the property owners are very fearful of the idea of kind of losing control over their parking supply. So I would just, I'd maybe just throw that out there as something to be aware of and to try to figure out how to deal with. Thank you.
Mike?
Sarah, could you or have Allison or Andrea circulate that RFP on the parking?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
So oh, go ahead, Carolyn.
It's possible that regarding the public spaces that we would all like to see improvements in, I just wonder if the sort of little bits of public amenities that you get building by building don't really add up to that much. Maybe I hope our city council is looking at this more broadly. How does the city make something happen like this rather than getting bits from developers? So anyway, I'm not so sure we can accomplish that much with our work on requiring retail to incentivize public spaces. So anyway, I'm kind of in favor of trying to keep this thing going. I think maybe we could do it in the next couple of meetings. I'm not sure, but obviously.
Well, that's a good segue to my question. I'm trying to figure out how to help staff understand how to make best use of our time next week and the time interim to now and the public hearing, there's four possible sort of paths forward that the staff laid out, right? So one is adopt it with no change. Number two is adopt with amendments. Number three is just completely decline it and say the whole thing is a bad idea and we should stop any progress. And then number four would be essentially the what I'll call the alternative, like a rewrite or alternative plan / ask for more time, because clearly an alternative plan is going to require more than one meeting to hash out. And so I don't know if it would be helpful, Jeff, for you, but I'm kind of like trying to understand, even in trying to think about how much or little I want to suggest in changing here, is one, I want to get a sort of a pulse from the group around where you're feeling in those four options, where you're sort of inclined to move. And then number two, I think I do want to go back to the statement I made last time, which is going to be somewhat, at the risk of sounding pessimistic. I know that the council has invested a lot of time and a lot of time and interest in sending the solution to us that they are already bought into. And so I worry with the other important things that I know that we have on our docket. I worry that we could find ourselves in a situation in taking on more work for ourselves and pursuing this, when that effort may be somewhat in vain, given that the city council has indicated that they have a pretty clear direction on where they want to go. That being said, it's our job to make sure that we're doing the right thing on behalf of the citizens of the community. And it's certainly well within our purview to say, it's great that you've got your ideas, but if they're not right, then we certainly are the body to help correct them in those. So, but I do think it warrants just saying that the city council clearly has a perspective on this that they have sent to us. So I don't know if anyone wants to lend their ideas around sort of where they're at with these four things and help, I think, us and the staff figure out how we want to best prepare for next meeting. Carolyn?
Well, I think we could, deliberate on the ordinance and attempt to make propose some amendments. I'd really love to have that opportunity. I think when it really comes down to it, that's where the process and you've pushed the decisions, push the thoughts and see what we can do with it. So I hope we can deliberate on the ordinance and work with it.
Yeah, we'll absolutely do that. And I think, let me be a little bit more clear. If there was a majority of people that said they really want to follow Mike down, and sorry, I'm going to call you out, Mike, because you sent the memo, but follow Mike down a road of, hey, we want to actually kind of throw out what was done and really reconceptualize all of this. That's going to take some time from staff in order to prepare it the right way. And I would rather have them start on that sooner rather than later. So I think that's just the sense. If everyone's like, nah, we'll just tweak it a little bit, let's not do a wholesale rewrite, then we don't need to get staff engaged at that level. But if there is a majority that says, nope, we want to kind of do a more holistic, look at this, then I do think that we need to provide some direction to staff, if that makes sense. So we will deliberate it either way, Carolyn.
Okay. And, I wasn't thinking tweak, but yeah, I'm thinking, maybe some substantial changes, but nonetheless.
Okay. We'll go Mike and then Victor and then Ted.
Yeah, Dan, I agree with you that the council is pretty heavily invested in this. But on the other hand, watching the council sessions from July and September, back in July, it was clear to me that there was a critical mass of the council that viewed some of the other alternatives as viable also. And so I think that I don't think that ship has necessarily sailed. More importantly, I don't see where the council has gotten the type of feedback that is reflected in some of the questions that Victor has asked and the questions raised in my memo. And I think that it would be a disservice to our responsibilities not to raise those issues. If the council wants to proceed, that obviously they can do that. That's their prerogative. But I think it would be a disservice to the community and to our responsibilities to not have raised those things.
Okay. Victor?
So to respond to your question, Chair Hubble, I'll put kind of where I'm currently at on this. I'm not a fan of doing nothing. I think as I pointed out, the current code isn't working as intended. And taking the proposal as is also, to me, doesn't seem to be a good option. I think, Mike talked about this being a math problem. I think the thing that that we haven't had a chance to talk about, that I'm sure we'll talk about when we debate this is not only a math problem. This is a math problem that takes about 30 to 40 years to solve. And it involves killing the patient in order to save the patient. And this is why I've been pushing very hard for staff to provide the analysis parcel by parcel. I've done the analysis on most of the parcels, and what you find is that the parcels that are most likely to be redeveloped, those being the ones with the oldest buildings on them, also result in a net loss in the initial net loss of retail. And so by my calculations, and again, we can argue about my assumptions, but according to my calculations, we end up losing another 35% of our retail before we begin to gain retail. So from where I'm at, either we take this and we make significant changes to it, or we go with what Mike is proposing and we make a significant we take a significant shift. But doing nothing and just taking it as is not something that I'm supportive of.
Great. Ted?
Yeah, so I've been taking a lot of notes from what I've been hearing my fellow commissioners saying tonight. And I think there's actually a recurring pattern of heading towards option 4 in the 4 options that were presented to us. And I think I'm also hearing a common vision kind of coming out of the mist on this. I kind of jotted some things down that we want to have a nice variety of retail, that we want to have a pleasant public amenities. We want to have sufficient parking for shoppers. We want to have equitable treatment of our property owners so that we're not creating winners and losers, and encourage a gradual redevelopment so it doesn't all happen at once, but it also doesn't just kind of stop and then nothing happens for 20 or 30 years. I think that's asking a lot, those 5 things. But I think that if we can kind of, I can type that up too if you guys want in between the meetings. But if we can kind of align around what are we trying to accomplish if we go after option 4, we might actually get there sooner than if we all have kind of different goals in going into that. That's kind of been my observation from the discussion this evening.
Okay. Tiffin?
So Ted, thank you. Thank you for that. I largely agree with you. I think the thing I would like to explore a little bit more is this concept of like equitable treatment, because I don't really see that as something that we need to do. I think we need to provide sort of I'm kind of thinking the vision and the implementation of the vision for what we want the town center to be. And in that, naturally, some properties will have sort of different development requirements or regulations than other ones. And of course, you don't want to be extreme. I'm not saying anything like that, but I guess I'm saying that's not a place that I come from, because I come from the idea that you want to think about what do you want and then how do you get there. And I don't think of, this concept of being like this property only has to have sort of similar development requirements to the next one as being critical. And I think, Mike, I could ask you, but I don't think there's any requirement in land use law that you do that. I mean, you obviously can't have a taking, but I don't think you have to, be so-called equitable.
Not in those terms. At the extreme edges, yeah, you run into problems, but there's no requirement of equity, as it were. The language the court has used, the Supreme Court has used typically is if something just goes too far. And I know that doesn't mean much. It has to be given context, but it's the point being equity. If it's really grossly inequitable, then yeah, it can get thrown out, but that's at the margins.
I'm gonna call you out, Jordan. We haven't heard from you. I would love to actually just get some perspective on where you're landing here.
Well, I just want to thank Mike, because I think his memo opened up my mind to how we were approaching this. And I'm also kind of leaning towards option 4 because of his memo. And I loved what Tiffin said as well about, broadening the scope. There's definitely a part of me who says, like, yeah, wouldn't it be great if we could have a bigger conversation about all of the different components of what makes a great town center, like parking and public space. But I understand why that's probably, a hill too high, or too steep. So if we do just kind of stay focused on the task at hand of redefining the, what's required for retail space for development, my inclination is to, ask the staff to take Mike's memo and any other specific feedback from this meeting back and work with that, because I like his last part of the memo, the legal considerations of no net loss. I think that was so well articulated and really gave me clarity, made me feel a lot better about us being, about sticking to our convictions of what will make a great town center and not get overoccupied. I mean, try to take in everyone's considerations, everyone's needs, to include developers and property owners. But at the end of the day, we need to stay focused on what will make a great town center, because they'll all benefit from that in the long run, right? If we have a vital retail core, all of the developers and property owners benefit from that. But if we don't define, what will make a great downtown core, then everyone loses. So that's where I'm leaning.
So Jeff, Sarah, I'm sort of hearing consensus that if it's not just some change to what's being proposed, it may border on significant change, either to reassessing the methodology for the formulas that are being used, or at least reevaluating how those formulas are applied, to even changing the measurement methodology in its entirety, per Mike's memo, or at least portions of it. What do you need from this group tonight, given what you just heard, what do you need from us tonight or in the next 2 weeks as we lead into the next phase of this with the public hearing to be the most efficient in, or at least the most productive in moving the conversation in the direction that I think you're hearing it moving? Does that make sense?
Kind of. Are you referencing, are you looking to have a finished product on November 3rd, or are you trying to get to a recommendation? I kind of lost you there.
I'm not trying to get to any sort of a recommendation. What I'm trying to get to is it's clear next time we're not gonna make 5 amendments and pass this thing and send it to the city council. That's the sense that I'm getting from the conversation that we just had. Knowing that, aside from everyone coming prepared with their thoughts around what they want to change in the same way that Commissioner Murphy had a great memo, is there anything that we could do for you either tonight or before then that would make the process easier for you as you think about the types of changes?
Yeah, thank you. So what we're going to do here over the next week and a couple days, because packets, like a well-oiled machine, packets will need to go out again before the end of next week. So what we're going to focus on is trying to get the questions that were posed this evening and any outstanding materials pushed out to the Planning Commission for your November 3rd meeting. What I would recommend to each of you as planning commissioners, this has been a robust conversation here this evening, and would be to continue to think about this over the next 2 weeks. And then when we reconvene on November 3rd, obviously one of the orders of business at the top of the agenda will be to complete the public hearing. As you close the public hearing and begin your deliberations, my advice to each of you would be to think about what you would like a motion to look like. If there's a motion that falls kind of into that 4th option that has been put forward, my recommendation would be to be as specific as possible in that recommendation so the council can see that and receive that. And the chair will have an opportunity to appear with staff in front of the city council on November 16th to lay out the recommendation and why the planning commission got to that recommendation. So again, it's the better the information in that recommendation, and keep in mind, it's more than just a motion, right? It can have some detail built with it. The council can receive that, and that'll allow the council to digest it as comprehensively as possible and have some discussion about it on the 16th of November. So I guess wait for our information to come to you. We'll try and complete our end of the task here over the next week and a half, but then keep this fresh on your minds and continue to really think about it. And again, come prepared to the 3rd then to, whatever your motion is going to be, put some meat on the bones, so to speak, and then we'll get it in front of city council.
Great. And I see, Carolyn, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. So I guess if someone were to make a motion to choose option number 4, I guess that would mean we would never go through the ordinance line by line with amendments, strikeouts, etc. And I think we should give that a shot. Even if we still end up at number 4, I think we should try to work with what we have and actually come to the meeting with our proposed amendments. We've discussed a great deal, but I think, now it would be the time to propose some real language or at our next meeting. That's what I would suggest. I hope we get that chance.
And the commission can certainly do that if they choose on November 3rd. It could, Allison, maybe you can help me out here, or if you're listening. That could be what's the term I'm looking for? A minority report that would accompany the planning commission recommendation.
Yes, we've, I think, done that in the past where we've had a majority recommendation and then a minority opinion represented in the report that went to the council.
Yeah.
Um,
We probably don't know where we end up if we don't actually go through the, the process of examining the ordinance and bit by bit and how could we change this. But yeah, if we end up after doing that with something we can't recommend, well, yeah, then we don't recommend it. But
okay, Ted, I see
or
you've
it
got your
becomes,
hand.
perhaps it becomes another one of the options where we're still saying, you need more work, but these are a few things that could be changed. Anyway, I'll quit there.
Ted.
I guess what comes to mind in terms of, should we try to look at the proposal that's in front of us and make amendments to it and see if we can get to where we're all trying to get to. I'm not sure that there's a path between the two edges of the chasm. I think that parking is just not part of what was handed to us by City Council, and the public amenities wasn't really part of what came to us from City Council. And I think that there needs to, if we want to, what I'm hearing from what other people are saying in the room, that there's a desire to have it be larger than the scope of what was sent our direction. So I'm not sure if there's a lot that we would gain by trying to, pursue the option 2 on the list of 4 options. I think that if we can try to consolidate around a common set of goals and pursue that, it would be a more productive session.
If I could offer, I've heard a few people mention their if I don't want to call it support, but certainly at least their willingness to consider Commissioner Murphy's recommendation as sort of I'll call it an alternative starting point, or at least a place where we can look at some areas to modify the code as it's been drafted to us. So, to your point, Ted, maybe that's the place where we start in looking through stuff next week, and use that as an opportunity to potentially bridge the chasm as you stated. Ted.
And there's one other thing I forgot to mention, which is we haven't had the public hearing yet. So we could always get some brilliant idea from somebody out in the public that we hadn't come up with as a commission. So I want to at least keep the mind open to the possibility that we could hear something that changes everything.
For sure.
Not likely, but let's at least be open to that.
I saw Sarah, you popped on. I wasn't sure if you had something you wanted to add. No. Let's see, I'll go to Tiffin, and then I see Carolyn is raising her hand.
Yeah, Ted, you bring up a good point, which is we're going to have a public hearing on something. Is it a bit disingenuous to have a public hearing on something that we potentially don't want to recommend? You know what I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around this idea that we're going to have a public hearing on a code and then quite likely recommend a completely different approach. So, I mean, maybe I'll throw this back to you, Dan, but it's like, how does that work? You know what I mean? It's almost like you would, well, I don't know. I'll stop talking, but.
No, I mean, look, I get your point. I think position from this seat would be to say that really the overarching conversation is broader than just the implementation. Like, there are details around the implementation using FAR versus no net loss, all these other sorts of things. The reality is the broader conversation, I think, and for any public that is listening, the thing that would be of value to me, at least, in the commentary that we get, while yes, there are details to be sorted out, but more broadly, I think Victor brought this up, which is what does the community value and how it wants us to continue to either consolidate in one way or another the commercial experience in downtown. There's a lot of different ways that we can actually get to that solution, and we'll debate those. But I actually have a higher overarching question, which is what sort of commercial space does the public actually value? If it is the corridor mentality of going from Mercerdale and up and all of that, like that's going to change. Less so arguments about what's a good methodology to implement it, is me just understanding from the community, well, what do you want your retail to look like? Do people actually desire that or not? Do they want to be a condensed, vibrant set of businesses that are all closely tied, closely sort of in proximity to each other? Or could vibrant be considered a dispersed set of retail establishments or commercial establishments in the town center? That could be equally as vibrant. It's a different vibrant, but it's equally as vibrant, depending on how you want to measure it. So it's a long-winded way of saying I don't think it's a disingenuous of us to continue to have the public hearing, because I do think there's a lot more we can get out of that conversation with the public than just the specific tools that we're going to use to implement the more visionary aspect of it. Did I ramble?
No, I mean, thank you. I mean, that kind of provides a different perspective than maybe I was thinking of. So thanks.
And it gives a little insight as to what I'm grappling with beyond just the FAR and not net loss. It's just the overarching like view of what's the right way to approach what commercial should look like downtown. And frankly, I'd almost like to start with that conversation next week, because it could affect the methodology that we used, as depending on what answer we come to, the accuracy of the data may be less relevant depending on which approach we want to take, right? So why argue about accuracy of data when it doesn't help us actually achieve one particular view or not of what things should look like? So
right. And I mean, I'd go back to your original comment just about the uses. We still have all these uses that we do have to accommodate somewhere in the town center, and we do whatever is developed has to have a methodology for doing that.
Yeah, and that alone, if I could give anything to Sarah and Jeff, like that alone, I think is an exercise. If we don't have time to do it next week, we need to schedule time as a group to actually walk through the use tables and actually understand. And maybe that's something you guys can provide in the packet, which is just maybe a high level, even if it's not the complete list, a link to where the list is and a brief treatment on how they're used and why they're used, and maybe how they're classified for anybody that hasn't been through that process. With that, I know we're at 9:30. Carolyn, oh, I'm sorry, did I miss you, Carolyn?
It's okay. I'm not sure if you can see my hand raised or not. I've sort of lost the whole screen. I can see the speaker in a little tiny box in the upper right corner of my background, so I don't know what's going on. But I just would like to add that so far tonight, we have, well, 2 meetings. We have had discussions. We've asked questions. We've shared concerns, but we haven't deliberated. For my part, I have not tried particularly to convince anybody about a particular thing that I think is good or should be changed, or things that I like about it. I've, held back because that's deliberation, So I would really like to have the chance, and I know we're going to have something called deliberation. I would like to move that we adopt the ordinance, hopefully have somebody second me, so that we can actually say, have a chance to make changes in the ordinance, and then at the end, either vote for it or vote it down, But, we haven't deliberated, and it would be, I think, inappropriate for a body like us to decide in advance to go to option 4 when we had not really had a chance to really deliberate amongst ourselves.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Carolyn, and that will be the intent of next meeting and potentially a meeting subsequent to that. And the outcome of what you're describing, I think, is the 4 options that we were discussing, and I was just trying to get a sense of to help the staff understand sort of the direction that we're going, so they can set expectations with both the council and their time. Jordan.
I finally have something else to say without you putting me on the spot. And forgive me if I missed this in the first 2, this meeting and the previous one, but I haven't. Has there been any examples put forth of town centers that we aspire to be like? And Dan, you actually you made me think of that with your comments just now, because I just thought, oh yeah, like I think about my hometown where I grew up on Bainbridge, and I don't think we can compare it to Bainbridge because I think they have a tourism draw, during the better months. So we just, for whatever reason, Mercer Island doesn't have. And I think a lot of people on the island wish we had something like that, right? I've had so many conversations over the years that I've been here with people about, how do we make Mercer Island more of a destination? And I don't know if that's possible. And it would be great if it wasn't required to have a vibrant retail, corridor or a downtown. It would be great if we could just do that on our own, and then tourism dollars or visitor dollars were just gravy, or the cherry on top. So I was just wondering, maybe that's a question to the staff, if that has been part of the research and analysis by CAI or anyone else.
No, not part of this current effort.
So do we think it should be, or is that just me? Does anyone else? Am I out on an island on that question?
I don't think you're out on an island. I think what it is, and I don't remember seeing it in the way the packet was done. Certainly in the comp plan, there are some broad sweeping visionary statements that might start. They're not as pointed as we want to be like Kirkland or Bainbridge or something like that, but certainly have broad sweeping statements around what the character and sort of the function of the town center should be. So that might be something worth looking at as a commission as homework before next time. But for any of the public that are listening, like commentary to us that answers that question, I think would be interesting and valuable. I see you, Carolyn, but Tiffin was up first. Let me go to her and then I'll come back to you.
I can't see anybody. Thanks for your patience.
No, that's all right.
Carolyn can go. That's fine. I was just going to try to address the question, but that's fine.
Well, let's go ahead, Tiffin.
Go ahead, Tiffin.
Oh, sure. So you're right. I don't think I've seen anything like that through this effort. And I hate to constantly go back to 2016, like that was the gold standard or something. But that was a lot of what we discussed then. We looked at Bainbridge. I mean, Dan will probably remember this. We looked at Bainbridge, we looked at Kirkland, we took field trips. So that kind of informed a little bit of the concept of having sort of like the right size area for retail. I would not say it was an analysis that was, foolproof or anything like that, but that kind of informed that, looking at Bainbridge a little bit. And then a lot of the architecture, I think, was informed, like going to places like Kirkland, looking at different buildings they had there. But you're right. I don't think we've talked about it this time. And I think some of that honestly has to do with the fairly limited scope of this. So maybe that's kind of part of what it was.
Thanks.
Carolyn.
Yeah, I just want to add that the council has given us a rather limited scope. There's a moratorium been declared for quite some time, which usually indicates some sort of emergency. that they want to address. So they really haven't asked us to try to come up with, you know, a town center vision, a very broad, you know, solve all of the big issues sort of vision. They've just asked us to help them figure out how to get retail as redevelopment occurs, and it is occurring. It's an emergency because you have Jinghua going forward without sufficient retail going in there. So that's why the moratorium was declared. And so I feel I'd like to respect the council's intent to maybe do this town center revision in parts, but to deal with the emergency of loss of retail, you know, promptly. So, and remember, you know, if we raise the required retail from what it is now, which is minuscule, to 0.26 in some of the buildings and a no net loss for others, that doesn't change market forces. It's not like we're saying there's not going to be any grocery stores anymore. That's kind of out of our hands. But we do have an emergency that we need to address. And many of the other things we want, I mean, I love them all, but I'm kind of thinking that there'll be some real value in doing this part of it.
Great, thank you, Carolyn. Jeff, sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, just briefly, just to Commissioner Boatsman's comments there, I think she actually, perhaps even without knowing it, summarized the council's findings from 2020 that were the findings that served as the foundation to enact the moratorium to begin with. So just in respect to visioning and a few of the other things that have come up here, Commissioner Boatsman's correct. The council hasn't gone through any of that exercise in their work in the last several months. They've been focused on trying to review options for exiting the moratorium. So Commissioner Boatsman well summarized. Not sure if you've read the ordinance from 2020, but you gave a pretty good rendition of it.
Oh, well, thank you. Accidental.
So thank you, Jeff and Carolyn, both for that perspective. And it is good to ground us back in the purpose of all of this. Given that, any last questions or comments before we move on and go through the last pieces of business? Mike.
Yeah, I would say that if you go back to my memo and look at what I was trying to propose, it really was designed to work within what the council has done thus far and not to necessarily re-envision the center, but really deal with the retail or commercial piece of this. And none of that would, and I had some comments about we could try to work in some other elements. Those are not necessarily essential, but I think preserving what we have would make it easier to integrate some of these other visions and other solutions that need to happen over the next year or so.
Great, thanks, Mike. Any other last thoughts before we move on to other business? Jeff or Sarah, any closing comments from you aside from the ones you've already provided?
None from me, aside from thank you for the robust conversation, and I look forward to continuing on November 3rd.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Great. All right. With that, thank you all for this. I feel like we're going to have at least one and probably a couple more really good meetings talking about this. So I look forward to getting down into the rolling up our sleeves and actually getting into the details. With that, we'll move to other business. Allison, good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Just a couple things real quick. So I wanted to give a couple staffing updates. I think at the beginning of the meeting, you mentioned Andrea's promotion, which we're all very happy for her about. But one of the things it means for this commission is that she will eventually be transitioning away from supporting us. So we're in the process right now of recruiting for a new senior administrative assistant who, once hired and trained up, will be joining to assist with running these meetings. We've also recently hired a senior planner, long-range planner, and his name's Adam Zach. He will be starting November 15th and will be joining me on working on long-range planning work. So you'll probably start seeing quite a lot of Adam towards the end of this year. So pretty excited to have a little more support and capacity, especially going into next year with the periodic update of the comprehensive plan coming up. Second thing, the city council did adopt a sign code amendment last night. It was a very stripped back and minimal version that was addressed particularly to complying with the Reed versus Gilbert stuff. So it just made some minor amendments to the temporary non-commercial sign provisions. And they expressed an intention to come back to the bigger changes that you all recommended in the future. I think they're planning to talk about this sometime next year and decide where they want to go with it. I think they felt that perhaps even more changes might be needed, and they wanted to see more outreach, especially with the business community. They'd heard a couple of public comments from someone representing the realtors. And so I think that segment, as well as other businesses, they're interested in hearing some more feedback from before making any bigger changes. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about the schedule for the next few meetings really quick. We'll be back next week on the 27th to talk about the docket. I actually was sitting here in the background working on the packet for that as you guys were discussing Town Center. So we'll be getting that packet out here as soon as we're able before the end of the week. And then November 3rd, of course, you'll be back to talk about Town Center and have the public hearing. And the final two meetings scheduled this year are November 17th and December 15th. And we're planning to bring back the final two docketed items for the year to have kind of an introductory study session on each of them. And so those two items are the proposal from Commissioner Boatsman about lighting and noise, and then the proposal from Daniel Thompson related to the noticing provisions in the administrative code. So I think, unless there's some changes with the schedule related to the Town Center item, the plan is to bring those two items back in the last couple meetings of the year.
Allison, sorry, I want to make sure I got this correct. So next week, October 27th, is that when we're meeting for the docket, or we're doing that on the night of the 3rd?
No, the 27th is the docket and only the docket, because I anticipate that being a longer conversation.
Okay, and how many items I know you're working on it still, but.
Well, we had proposals from 8 community members. One of those was another submission from Daniel Thompson that was identical to what he submitted last year and includes 6 items, one of which, as I mentioned, was already docketed this year. So I think altogether there's around 16 items. There's 3 from staff, but some of them, many of you have seen before. So.
And the outcome of the meeting next week is just to actually have a recommendation that we send to the council.
That's correct.
Which ones should be included or not?
Absolutely, yes. So the commission's recommendation on which ones should be included in the final docket, and then the council will take that up in December and make a decision on what will be docketed.
Great. Okay, good. So I just as a check on attendance, does anybody anticipate that they will not be able to make either next week, the 27th, or the following week, November 3rd?
I'll be gone the 3rd.
Okay. You're gonna miss all the fun.
You won't
I'll
have
be
to put
gone
up with me, huh?
I'll
What
be
was
gone
that,
next
Jordan?
week.
You're gone next week?
I can't
Okay,
make the 27th.
great. Well, it sounds like we'll at least have a quorum, so that works out good. And then I, of course, navigated away from my looking at my thing here. Great. Any other so that covers absences. Any other announcements or communications from anyone? All right, hearing none. Again, our next scheduled meeting as a special meeting will be next week, the 27th, I think is what I just said, right? Yeah. And so we will see you then. Andrea, do you have anything else for the good of the order? Okay. If everyone can hold on to the line, and when we after I close the meeting, Andrea will shut everything off. So thank you all for the great conversation tonight, and look forward to talking next week. And with no other business before the commission, the time is now 9:46 p.m. and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.